but I'm going to try and find it.
Yeah, I'm not ready to send.
I'm a client who's a realtor out in Denver. That's 6 kids.
Oh, yeah.
So every time he's got a private for me, he's like, oh, we got other kids. He's playing one.
Okay.
Yeah, I was listening to him.
Missing the.
I think we're good. You ready?
It's up.
Comments.
Do you know whether is Heather?
Tom is on Zoom. Heather is not attending.
Okay. All right.
Some of the comments on the first page.
You guys good?
Yep.
All right. All this meeting is CPDC to order.
Perfect. I can start with my spiel.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yep.
So thank you all for joining us tonight for the CPDC hearing of Monday, February 12th, 2024. I'm Andrew McNichol, the Community Development Director. I'm joined tonight with Senior Planner Mary Benedetto. And from the board tonight, we have Chair John Weston, Vice Chair Tony Diadretto, Mark Wetzel, Hillary Mative, and on Zoom is Thomas Armstrong. Heather Klisch is not with us tonight, but as you can tell, this is a hybrid meeting. We have many people in person, a few on the Zoom. If you are providing public comment tonight, a few things to be aware of. If you're in person, please raise your hand. The chair will look to acknowledge you. Please come up to the podium. If it's your first comment, please say your name and address for the public record. If you are on the Zoom, we ask that you please stay muted until the public comment, and then you can either utilize the raise hand feature, or if your video is on, simply wave your hand around and we'll look to capture you. For the chair, similar, please just say your name and address for the record. There's a sign-in sheet in the corner for those of you in person. If you didn't see it or sign in as of yet, please do so. Outside of that, this meeting is being broadcasted and recorded by RCTV on the local channels and their YouTube page. And I think we're good to go from there.
All right. Thank you.
Condensed.
So to start off, right, we have three items that are all scheduled for 7 o'clock. And they have all been requested to be continued by the applicant. Sometimes we read the request. What do
you can do either, or you can simply motion. We've gotten all the agreements from the applicants, so they are
okay. All right. So we want to continue them, all three of them, to the March 11th meeting.
Yes, you will have to do them individually though.
Yes. So first one is 0 Annette Lane.
Motion to move the hearing for 0 Annette Lane to March 11th.
Second.
And roll call vote, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Tony?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
John, yes. Hillary?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Motion to move 0 Harold Ave to 3/11/2024.
Second.
All right, we'll hold a roll call vote. Tony?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
John, yes. Hillary?
Yes.
Tom? He said yes. All right.
Now, 246 Walnut subdivision is a little weird because we need to open it and then continue it. Is that correct?
Yeah, you could do either, or you could open it and that does start the clock. So right, typically we get agreed continuances anyways, or you could continue the opening of the hearing because that's what the applicant has agreed to.
So that would be a motion to continue the opening of the hearing for 246 Walnut Street.
Right.
But abutters will not be renoticed, correct?
This will not be renoticed, but we could provide a courtesy notice for that. We're happy to do so.
They're delaying because they are still revising their plans with Conservation Commission. So the butters are aware and engaged already with Conservation Commission. So I would say that we don't necessarily feel that we need to renotice them because they're already in process. That's why they're delaying by a meeting.
All right. So motion to continue the opening of the public hearing for 246 Walnut Street to 3/11 and the subsequent deadlines associated with the project.
Second,
All right, roll call vote. Tony,
Yes.
Mark,
yes.
John, yes. Hillary,
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So now we got that out of the way. The next item on our agenda is the continued public hearing for special permit water, stormwater, site plan review of 252, 258, and 262 Main Street in Pinedale Ave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. For the record, my name is Attorney Jesse Schumer, representing the applicant on this matter. Andrew, would it be possible for me to share my screen? We've got some illustrative slides that go through the materials that we filed last week. If I join the Zoom meeting and
Yeah.
mute myself, I think
Yes,
that would
the best way.
okay. Wanted to just confirm before I go ahead and did that.
Let me make you a co-host real quick. Mary, you might have to do that.
Says the host is disabled, participant screen sharing.
You should be good now.
Here we go. Thank you. There it is. So for the record, again, Attorney Jesse Schumer, my office is located in Wakefield, representing BLVD Reading LLC, the applicant for this matter. Our principal is on his way. I believe is stuck in traffic, so he'll be here in a few minutes. Severia Fulcinati, manager of that entity. With me here tonight is our architect, Rob Paccioni of RP Architectural Studio, as well as Carlton Quinn of Allen and Major Associates. Our traffic engineers are with Vanass and Associates. They're not present tonight, but if there are any questions that the board members have for the traffic engineer, we're happy to take those down and convey those to the engineers and get back to you at the next hearing. I'll just go ahead and run through the slides real briefly, and then I'll ask my colleagues if they have anything they'd like to add with respect to the civil and architectural plans that were filed with the board. But just a brief overview of the project changes, I believe would be appropriate for the board members as well as the members of the public who are here tonight. Since we were last before you, I was not before you at the previous instances in which this project was presented to the board. There have been some significant project changes that have been made to this. It's concessions to the neighbors, we believe appropriate for the neighborhood and sensitive to the concerns that the neighbors who are well represented tonight have expressed to the board, as well as members of the commission to the applicants. My client has, we feel, listened to the feedback that we've received thus far and has responded to it with the project changes that I'll outline for you tonight. So this slide just runs through some of the most salient bullet points of the project changes that we've made on this iteration of project changes. I'll show you on the next slide the revised site layout, but the proposal has been reduced in size in terms of not only the size of the building, but also the unit count, as well as the commercial space in this project. As outlined in the first bullet point up there at the top, the project has been reduced now since the original proposal of 40 units by 25% to 30 units. That represents 31.6 units per acre. It represents 29.2 if you count the 10 Pinevale parcel, which is now proposed to be remaining as a single family home. The commercial component of the project has been reduced by 11% to 7,500 square feet, and I believe that was previously 8,400 square feet or thereabouts. The building has been reduced significantly in its footprint, as well as moved back from Main Street to create some additional space for landscaping at the front of the site and to improve the streetscape on Main Street, as well as the viability of the commercial spaces. The site design has also now been significantly modified to completely eliminate the vehicular access on Pinevale Avenue. Now all access to and from the site will be to and from Main Street via two access driveways, entirely eliminating all project traffic on Pinevale. We felt that that was an important change that was made to respond to the concerns of the neighbors about project traffic on Pinevale Avenue. And we've responded to that concern. The impervious surface on this modified design has been reduced significantly from 38,000 square feet to just over 34,000 square feet. And the parking supply has been modified, but with the reduction in commercial space and residential units, we have not reduced the number of parking spaces to correspond with that. Instead, we have created a parking surplus of 9.5 parking spaces over the requirement of the zoning bylaw, which creates some necessary spaces for visitors, guests, Uber, delivery drivers, rideshare, those kind of vehicular traffic that we all know is a increasingly prevalent part of our lives, and especially for projects like this. There's a summary on the right side of the page there showing the revised parking summary, and that's all included in the updated materials. Next, I'll go to the picture so that you can all get a sense of what the revised project layout is proposed to be now. As you can see, the project building has been moved to the center of the site, away from the residential neighbor at 2 Pinevale Avenue. The secondary access has been created between the building and 2 Pinevale to create vehicular access around all 4 sides of the building. That improves the emergency response ability of the town services for the building to be able to access all 4 sides of the building, including the front from Main Street, and then the remaining 3 sides from the site parking lot. There was some feedback from the town departments that a access to Pinevale Avenue was desired by the town to improve access for emergency vehicles, but we heard also a significant amount of feedback from the neighbors that was in no uncertain terms not something that the neighborhood wanted to see. So what we have attempted to do here is find a happy medium, as it were, and to find a compromise by having multiple access points on Main Street. We'll need to get permission from MassDOT to have those 2 curb cuts on Main Street, but we have eliminated the vehicular access on Pinevale Avenue. And instead, that single family house will remain. There'll be some additional landscaping proposed to really create a sensitive buffer to this project to the neighbors on Pinevale. So the hope being that the neighbors, when they drive down Pinevale, won't even be able to see that the project is there once all of the landscaping and buffering is in place. The building has also been, as I noted, moved away from 2 Pinevale to create an increased buffer to that property. The distance, as I'll show in the next slide, is slightly less than double the height of the building, which essentially eliminates all question of shadow impact from this new building. It's over 80 feet away from that property, from that building now, providing a significant buffer to that residential neighbor, as well as moving the commercial aspect of the project away from that neighbor as well. Reduces the intensity of use in the vicinity of that neighbor, and also we feel sensitive to some concerns that Mr. Weston previously raised at prior hearings about the viability of the commercial space by creating some additional room for that use to really thrive on the corner of the building, some visibility to vehicles passing down Main Street. So really all signs, I think, for the team, when we went back to the drawing board after the last hearing, all signs pointing towards this location being the best location for the building for a number of reasons, including the commercial viability, the buffer to the neighbors, as well as the access around the building. Just going to the next slide. This is a diagram, and it's a little small, but this is in the submission materials as well. This shows the distance to the residential neighbors in the Pinevale Avenue neighborhood. You can see now that the closest neighbor is at 2 Pinevale, which is 80 feet away from the proposed new structure to the residents at 2 Pinevale. The proposed building is 45 feet tall. So as I mentioned, concerns about shadow impact on that structure are essentially eliminated based on the distance between the structure that's now created by that setback. The other neighbors, as you can see, 10 Pinevale, that's owned by the development. That house is 88 feet away from the structure. No, I'm sorry, 12 Pinevale is 88 feet away. I'm not certain what the distance to 10 is, but as I mentioned, that is also owned by the developer, so not a concern in terms of setbacks and distance. The remaining neighbors are all well over 100 feet away, up to, as you can see on the diagram, 437 feet away in the case of 46 Pinevale Avenue. That's also heavily wooded back there, and there's a wetland buffer that's shown on the diagram there. So essentially, there will be no perception of this project to those neighbors to the rear of the site. Moving on to the topic of landscaping. This is an updated diagram of the project site, which shows some of the modified landscaping on this revised layout. You can see in the top left corner, the revised loading area. It's been moved to that corner of the property to provide a significant buffer to the neighbors on Pinevale. So essentially all loading activities and use of that space will be as far away as we can make them from those neighbors. You'll also see in the rear of the site that we're adding a significant number of new trees. We're preserving 9 and adding 57 new trees for a total of 66 total trees on site, excluding the trees on 10 Pinevale. We've also at the rear right corner of the site here, you can see that we have preserved 3 significant trees that were requested by the residents at 12 Pinevale that have been retained and preserved on this site. And we've also, and I'll show you in a future slide, we're also proposing a new landscape berm at the rear of the property line. There'll be landscape on both sides of the berm as well as on top of it in order to really raise the landscape buffer up and create a buffer to the neighbors on day one that will exist in addition to the landscaping that will continue to grow once it's in place. I'll show you a bit of more detail in a future slide in just a moment. The structure itself, as I mentioned, has been pushed back about 2.5 feet from Main Street, which allows the creation of a landscape edge along Main Street here to improve the streetscape and really just improve the presentation of the building and draw it into the neighborhood, buffer it from residents, buffer it for beautify the streetscape as neighbors are walking on the sidewalk in front of the building. As I mentioned also, there's a significant reduction in impervious surface, about 9%. And as you see the top left corner near where the loading space is, that is the area that is located within the wetland buffer to the wetlands that are located off-site. So there's a significant reduction in impact within the buffer zone with this new plan layout. It's essentially largely untouched with the exception of that loading zone. This is a little detail image of the front streetscape showing some additional landscaping along the front of the building to buffer that. Next slide is a detail of the rear lot, which is really, I think, is coming along very nicely with, you see this program spaces for residents, a lot of lush greenery along the back. And the back property line, you can see here, this is a retaining wall, which allows for the creation of this 3-foot berm here along the rear property line. That will be planted with plantings in front of the retaining wall, as well as plantings on the berm itself. So the berm will also have a 6-foot perimeter fence. It'll be an opaque fence, creating a 9-foot buffer on day one of this project to the rear of the project site. The landscaping will, of course, continue to grow past day one, and those trees are selected for their ability to grow quickly to a great height to provide as much landscape buffering to neighbors as possible. Shifting next to the plans for 10 Pinevale. The house at 10 Pinevale was previously proposed to be raised, and the vehicular access was coming through this parcel. That plan has now been abandoned. The structure will be retained. The structure will be enhanced and renovated. And what they're proposing to do is to convey an easement to the development site to allow for some of the landscaping, parking areas in that rear portion of the site that you see there. Lush landscaping around the rear, retaining this tree here, landscaping all around here, and relocating the existing driveway to this location here, really creating as significant of a buffer to the project as possible. And there's no way to create more of a buffer than with the existing structure. That will remain, it'll be a residence as it is today, and really maintain the residential feel of the neighborhood. Moving to architecture, Rob, did you maybe want to run through this? I think you could probably speak to this a little bit better than I could.
Sure. So my name's Rob Passioni. I'm the architect on the project. I'm from RP Architectural Studio. My office is located in Wayland, Massachusetts. So I'll just run through this real quick. Just kind of explain what we did on these elevations. So start with the upper floor. So what we did was, if you look at the top left-hand corner of this page, you'll see the 10-foot Main Street setback. So what we did was we set back the front of the building from Main Street, total of 10 feet. That's to create a different massing up there, and also to meet the guidelines for the design guidelines for this area of Reading. We've kept the corner accents on each side of the building, as you can see with that, it's a masonry type material. And we've overall, from our original design, have kept all the same materials. We've just reconfigured them a little bit. As you can see on the lower elevation, the north and south step back, in addition to the top 10-foot setback, we've also stepped back the sides of that upper floor, a total of 3 foot 7 inches. So we have on 3 sides of the building now step back the upper 4th floor. Also, we've eliminated all of the roof decks. All we have going up there now is going to be some rooftop equipment that you would typically see on this type of building. Short area for the elevator overrun and just the stair access tower. So that, overall massing of that upper roof area has been significantly reduced. And on the Main Street front elevation, also, you can see the storefront on the ground level. We have a considerable amount of storefront glazing down there. We've provided a storefront type system on each corner of the building, which will really kind of give you a good view into that retail area. And then we've lined up with the windows, residential windows above, again, some ample retail glazing there so that you can see into those spaces depending on how they're divvied up and really give you a good view of what's going on the inside. The window articulation on the upper floors, we've tried with pretty much all the units to create as much window space as we can. The scale of these windows are roughly, the 2 windows together are 8 feet wide by 6 feet tall, so they're very large. We did that to, obviously provide lots of natural daylight into the structure, which, as many of you probably realize, is desirable for tenants and users of the building. And again, the articulation of the materials, it's similar to our original submission. Just to point out the materials, the tan material is a clapboard siding-like material that it's like a high-end residential type material that you would see on like a house. The darker color is more of a modern sort of concrete-looking material. And then, as I said before, the corners are like a sort of beige-colored sandstone type material. So we like the way that the different set of kind of tones of these materials play off each other. So I'll just skip to the next sheet. That one, great, thanks. So this is the side elevation. So just kind of pointing out again, we have similar articulation of materials on this side. The red box is just highlighting where we have areas that are glazing for the retail space. Again, at the front corner of the building, we have a storefront system there, so that's open quite a bit to the Main Street side. And then we have side access point, which is that middle window. And then again, some more storefront behind that. So since we've changed the parking on this project and really trying to, so it gives sort of three sides of the building, some good access for retail. Above, again, it's very similar with the large windows for the residential space. On the top floor, we do have a kind of an alcove there where we created a balcony for some outdoor living for that particular unit. And then on the rear, we have some balconies for some outdoor living, since we did eliminate the roof decks. So floor plan wise, just to run through these real quick. So this is the ground floor. You can see on the the lower part of this plan and the sides, this is all open retail space. Ideally we'd have one tenant, but depending on how the market works out, this may be subdivided to a certain degree. The main entrance to the building is on the back left-hand corner there. That's the main entrance, I should say, for the residential side. We have a large lobby where you walk in, there's mailboxes. We have an automated package storage system, which is essentially where delivery people would come in. They would place the box within an automated lockable system. And then the tenant would come down and grab that out of the system when they come to get their box. So it's basically a way to really organize a lobby space instead of having boxes all over the place. And we have stairs going up to the upper floors for obvious egress, elevator, typical few mechanical and electrical rooms here, but a majority of this floor is the 7,500 square feet retail. So just running through the units real quick. So as Jesse had mentioned, there's 30 units. There are 10 2-bedrooms, 17 1-bedrooms, and 3 studio spaces. So we really tried to, give a few different options and try to cover the market as best we could as far as different types of units. Typically on these floor plans, the corners are where we put the 2-bedroom units. Each of these units, for the most part, have an on-bedroom bathroom. So it's a nice feature that we thought would work well for this building. We have, ample-sized kitchens, large living room areas. We gave a lot of, light to the bedrooms with these big windows, and also the living rooms. We really tried to open those up and just provide as much natural daylight as possible. There's a central corridor system with the 2 egress stairs and then an elevator, which is, pretty standard for this type of building. There are 2 accessible units in this building, just to meet accessibility code. Each unit will have its own laundry system and mechanical systems. So we've allocated space for that. Just looking at the kitchen areas, what we've also done here is try to create an open concept where there's the kitchen and living room space, just to give kind of a bigger feel for these types of apartments. The size of each apartment for the studios were around 460 to 530. 1 beds are around 549 to 791 square feet, and then the 2 beds is 947 to 1,006 square feet. So these are a little bit above average that you typically see as far as square footage goes. So the second and third floors are essentially the same layout. On the upper floor, so since we did that 10-foot setback and the 3-foot setback on the sides, this floor plan is a little bit different. We have actually 4 2-bedrooms on this floor, and then a studio and a few 1-bedrooms. So it's a little bit different layout, but similar design concept. I also want to mention that the third and the fourth floor, we also have the balconies off the back for some extra outdoor living space for those units. And then on each side of the building on this floor, there's that little alcove where we have some more outdoor space. And then just the rooftop, it's pretty minimal now, as you can see. We basically just have some heat pump units, some ventilation, stair access, and then a elevator overrun. So, we plan to centralize all the mechanical equipment so it's not visible from the street or from the neighbors or anything like that. Again, the elevations we've already talked about, so nothing new here. These are just the non-annotated elevations. So I will pass this on to Carlton.
Good evening, Carlton Quinn with Allen Major Associates. I don't have much to add here, but I'll just run through the few plans that we had submitted. You can see this fairly simple site plan with the building fronting on Main Street and just a horseshoe parking lot going around the building. We've analyzed it for the fire truck. It does facilitate all the fire truck movements. There's ADA access all the way around the building. As Jesse mentioned, the compactor and the loading have been pushed all the way to the left of the site to try to get them as far away from the residents as possible. The amenity space in the rear, just to try to explain that a little better. So as you come into the amenity space and you're looking out at the residents, you're going to see a 3-foot-high retaining wall with a 6-foot-high fence on the back of it. And the berm is going to come up to the top of the retaining wall in the back, and that'll all be planted just to try to give a little bit more screening to that area in the rear. And then Jesse went through it pretty well, but the existing single-family house, we did flip the driveway to try to get more screening in that area to the rear to try to reduce the impervious, put a few more trees in there. There's the fire truck turning plan, and then the landscape plan. And that's all I have. Thank you.
So that concludes our presentation, Mr. Chair. We would, if members of the team are available for questions, if the board members have any, we'd love to hear your feedback.
Great, thank you.
Would you like me to take the share screen down?
Probably for now, if there's plan sheet questions, I can help up.
Yeah. Questions from the board? I'll start over on this side.
I will defer.
So I'm assuming we're gonna get a full set of engineered and architectural drawings for review, because we haven't gotten any comments from the public, the engineering and fire and police. And then I'm sure it's because you guys did a lot of work in a short amount of time. There are little discrepancies here and there between the plans, like that one plan showed only a 5-foot front setback instead of 7.5 foot. And I think on the plan that I got, it said 28 units instead of 30 units. So there were some little things like that actually, I think it was in the letter, there was a parking analysis that had some discrepancies. So I assume we're gonna get the engineering department will look at
Sure, so
using drainage and.
I think the intention with this set of plans was to gauge if the direction was correct before they
And
invest in.
yeah, and I think you've answered a lot of my concerns with the project, with moving it farther from the residents, decreasing the impervious area, making the building a little less of a big, huge mass on the side of the road. So I appreciate that you listened to the comments and the public's comments, and I know the public comments had some questions and things also that I'm sure can be worked out, but I appreciate that. I had a question on the architectural. I think you said on the 4th floor, the front units, since there was a setback, was going to have outdoor access. Did I get
No,
that
they don't
right?
have outdoor access. Each of the side units on the corners, there's an alcove
Oh, okay,
where we do have some outdoor access, but the one's directly in the front.
okay. And I assume the stormwater report's going to get some revisions?
Yeah, we do need to revise the stormwater report because we obviously had that access previously, and there's a lot of discrepancies with that at the site, but
Yeah.
it's gonna be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, okay, because I started looking at it, but it was 280 pages. And I like to flip back and forth, and I can do that with my PDF version. So anyway,
Maybe a little light reading during the storm tomorrow.
and on the retail commercial floor plan is the idea that you're going to build to suit, so there might be 2 or 3 different.
Yep.
units.
Yep, I think it's not clear at this point what those are going to be, so yeah, build to suit is the idea.
And how many affordable units?
It's, is it 10% or 5 or 50?
10%.
10%, so it's gonna be 4. Three. I'm sorry, 3.
What you want for, we'll take it.
Gentleman in the back row, I think, just had a heart attack. 3 is the correct number.
All right, that's all I had.
I don't have a lot. I did notice there's some discrepancies and kind of, not everything matches. Something that would be very helpful for me to understand with the berm and the retaining wall is if we could get a site section that we understand how this is, how you're coming from Main Street, how far you have to come up, and that part is, I cannot wrap my head around it at this time. And then another question I had is on the architectural drawings, the balconies that you have out the back. The floor heights are not quite again, corrected, if you will. It's like it goes from 98 on the first floor to 74 on the second floor to 83 on the third floor, and then all the other floors. So how high off the ground are those balconies on the third floor or fourth floor, whatever the balconies are?
Let me get up here so I can read it. It's a little too far away.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I was trying to do the math, but it's
Yeah,
like,
Yeah.
like my head was
Trying to
like,
zoom in and.
Done in.
That does not cooperate.
Yeah, the dimensions,
so it's,
I think this is 10, I think this is 14. Then we had 8 foot, so that's say about 34 feet and then 24 feet roughly. The whole building is 45 feet.
and then,
I can dimension those. The
Yeah.
thing is, the balconies are stepped down 8 inches from the floor level,
okay.
so it's not actually dimensioned. I mean, we could just.
Yeah, it's just the side dimensions, their floor dimensions are, and then your tower goes up another, your stair tower goes up a bit more, right?
Yeah, that's to get headroom to get up.
Yep, okay.
Tom,
Yes, Tom's got.
saw his hand up.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you can hear me now.
Yep.
Let's see, I have a few, they're all odds and ends, and I agree with Mark and others that have spoken that we think I think you were personally quite, understood where the public was coming from and addressed a number of their issues. From a personal perspective, you've, got a front yard setback of 7.5. I'd really like to push that to 10 to give 5 foot of landscaping as opposed to 2.5. Because I assume you're also gonna have front doors on, to the commercial properties on the street side as well too. You want me to run through all of these issues here and then you can address anyone you wish?
Yeah, I think so.
That makes
Yes.
So I'd like to get 10. I don't think it's gonna be a problem because you can just push back on the green space in the back of the property. Let's see, the reason for more landscaping is you don't really have enough to put anything of any height in the front with 2.5 feet. And you might want some diminutive type trees and the like. That's just a thought. I think it'd be a good idea to tag the 9 trees that you're gonna leave in place. You can tie a yellow ribbon around the stump, or trunk rather. I think you've answered the question, the unit's gonna be rentals or for sale, and they're gonna be rentals, as I understood you say.
Right.
I think you need to address pest control, in your final report. I'll have more to say on that in a second. Let's see. I still would like to see an easement for a joint parking agreement with the neighbor. Now, you do not have to have the neighbor agree, but if the neighbor comes before us, we may want to cause that connection to be made there, but I'd like to see if you're amenable to a joint parking agreement that obviously would not come into fruition until we got the concurrence of your neighbor. I had a little worry about this line of sight on one of the Main Street entrances because you show some shrubbery there and also some trees there. So I was a little bit concerned there, and that should be addressed. Your sidewalk in the front of the property was asphalt, and I'd like it to be concrete. I assume the others there, haven't been there recently, are concrete. The owner at 2 Pine Vale would like, you're gonna put a wall there they seem to raise two issues. One, since you're excavating a lot, I don't want to have my property substantially above yours and have the soil subside. So it seems like they want a wall of some kind there to, if you're excavating as you plan to in your earlier ones, to basically support the soil that they have. And they did want soundproofing, it appeared, in the wall. And I don't know what you thought about that. Let's see. The answer to the number of affordable units. Let's see, they do not want a pocket park off Star, and it appears you do not plan one. They also want down lighting, just so it doesn't shine in their backyards, and I assume you can address that. Those were my overall comments I had for possible changes. Obviously, I don't know how my colleagues would agree or disagree with those, but feel free to comment. Oh, and the one overarching one, I know I've had success because I've been in apartments as well too, where they've had the trash chutes on the end of each floor. And I do know it stops garbage bags from leaking all over the hallways and things like that. Have you considered that? If so, where? So I think that's a list of the issues that I saw.
So maybe if I could start there, I think we haven't gotten to the point of designing the specifics of the trash arrangement, but I think we can go back as a team and take a look at the question about trash chutes. And I assume that ties into your question about pest control.
Yes, it does.
Okay. We'll take a look at that and see if it makes sense. I know that there's some varying opinions about the use of those trash chutes in residential buildings these days, but we'll take a look at it and get back to you at the next hearing, what we're proposing to do with that. We can take a look at pushing back the front setback a little bit, see if there's some room to play around and change up the landscaping in the front. Perhaps this is my own ignorance from not being at the previous hearings, but I wasn't quite sure what you were referring to in your comments about an easement for joint parking. With the neighbor.
On that, a lot of times it's used to limit the number of turnoffs and turn-ons into major roadways. So you had one originally when I originally made the comment. Now you've proposed a second one, so it may be of less concern, but it's safer if there's fewer cars turning onto the highway from fewer driveways. And that's the purpose of where I'm coming from. I do have a slight concern about the one driveway you've got closest to Pinevale, and that is, might they be too close? With traffic turning on and off. You might have one vehicle in Pinevale wanting to turn right and yours wants to turn left. So I think going forward, I'd like to see if we can get that type of an arrangement where adjoining commercial owners might agree to common connections or common uses of their driveways. It would allow us as well to reduce the number of parking spaces and permit more green space. I mean, that's the thinking behind it.
Okay, I think that's probably something we'll need to discuss maybe offline with the town.
Yeah, he's referring to the property directly to the south,
Yeah.
adjacent commercial, which we discussed. Yeah.
Okay.
We can, get us into as much detail, but from the staff perspective, that just means an impact to parking, wherever that curb cut could be, or some sort of access change in this current configuration. So if that were to ever even come online, maybe that becomes a shared parking agreement. Maybe you need less on this site, but there are logistics to work through there for sure.
With respect to the curb cuts, this will require a highway access permit, right? So we're going to have to go to MassDOT after we were with the board, and so the final details of the curb cuts, I think those questions that Mr. Anderson had about, Mr. Armstrong had about the distance of those between each other. Those are things we'll have to tie down with MassDOT when we go there. With respect to I'm sorry, excuse me.
I understood. I understand. Yes,
Okay.
I agree with you.
With respect to the sight lines, so what the town's department heads will require for a site like this, and it'll be designed with the supervision of the traffic engineer to have the sightline triangles. Typically, I believe it's no signs, no landscaping higher than 3 feet to maintain those sightline triangles at the point where the vehicles are going to be exiting the site, to make sure you can see vehicles coming down Main Street. And again, we'll have to work with MassDOT in terms of how they want entrance and exits to and from this site, whether they want, you know, left turn only, right turn only, that sort of thing. That'll be arranged with them, whatever they think is most appropriate for this site and safest, obviously, is a paramount concern to us as well. The issues about the retaining wall at 2 Pinevale and the retaining wall, I think we'll probably need to discuss that with the neighbor and get back to the commission on what, if we've reached a resolution with the neighbor about that. But we're certainly willing to have that conversation with them about what they're looking for and whether that's something we can accommodate. The pocket park, the question about the pocket park, it's not proposed to be open to the public. It's just going to be a resident amenity. And it'll have as I mentioned, and as Carlton mentioned, a fence at the end, at the rear. So it's not being proposed to be opened up.
At one point, they discussed maybe where that Star Road was doing a neighborhood park or something, but I think they've also been discussing some additional improvements with the Pineville Conservation.
Yeah, I think we'd like to keep that under consideration.
Yeah, I mean, we're open to all these options. I think that we've heard some pushback from the neighbors about having that be something that's open to the public, and I think I understand the motivation for that, but we'll say that's in process, but we're willing to go both ways. I think it would make a nice amenity back there for the residents. Downlighting, that's absolutely doable. I believe the project is dark sky compliant.
Yeah, we'd all be dark sky compliant. We have recessed downlights and boost next to pointing down.
Okay, perfect. I think that covers everything that Mr. Armstrong had raised. At least I hope it does.
Yeah, I think it does.
A little bit just to be aware of in case this conversation evolves. So I believe the intent of this application, right, this zoning transition line here between the S15 and Business A is right at the edge of the parking. The intent has been, to date at least, to keep the parking out of the S15 zone and away from that. Not only is that further encroaching into the residential zone, it just requires additional relief and past it. And I don't think we would be able to shrink this 22-foot wide drive aisle, just given the fire department turning movements that are needed. So just to kind of throw that out there, we'll certainly make the ask and ask you to do your due diligence on it. But if it doesn't end up plausible, that's probably likely wise. So.
Yep. No, I would acquiesce to staff on that issue. That gets into how far, what the setback should be from the front of the road. I just felt that it looks like the way you've got it, that the sidewalk adjoins the road, and then you've only got 2.5 feet after that for the landscape area. But I would concur with whatever staff says on that issue in light of the parking in the rear.
Yep. No, I hear you, Tom. Good question and ask for sure. So.
My colleague has also brought to my attention that there's 8 feet from the back of the sidewalk to the front of the building. So it's been pushed back. The 2.5 foot is the setback, but there is some space there.
Okay. That would probably answer my question with regard, my concern.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And it looks like that's a bituminous sidewalk out.
It is, yeah.
That is a point that I missed. So we'll take a look at that as well. Changing to sidewalks, to concrete.
Yeah, that goes back to our, I think, often discussed issue regarding the edge of the road versus the edge of the parcel, and how you can't ever tell when unless you have a plan. So
Maybe
always
just
comes up.
if we're talking sidewalks and the replacement of the Main Street sidewalk. I think the applicant team had also broached the idea of replacing the sidewalk down Pinevale. A little bit in disrepair. And they had considered or have asked if, right, we would want that to be of consideration, at least in past iterations of the plan. I think the only drawback of that is there's 2 mature trees within that sidewalk around 12 Pinevale, and those would need to be removed for the replacement of that sidewalk. So kind of the idea of, would you rather have a better sidewalk or keep the mature trees? So I think that's been left off in this iteration for that reason, just so everybody knows. It's really to preserve those 2 trees while we talk sidewalks.
Tony, comments or?
Well, other than from what everyone else said, when discussing the lighting in the down, what do you expect for lighting in the parking lot itself?
It'd probably be pole mounted, right?
Yeah, we did submit a photometrics plan with our original submission, which I believe were 20-foot poles with lighting on them. Building lighting?
I believe all poles.
It was poles, yeah. So it would be the same pole lighting that we would propose there.
Okay,
And sorry, we did agree to the Concom that it would be a wildlife happy lighting.
yeah, the blue light, yeah.
It's a technical term.
It is. Good. Yeah, I'd like to open it up, public comment, if anyone has any. I know this group isn't shy.
Well, first, I just want to thank all of you and thank you for the change.
I'm sorry, name and address first.
I thought you all knew me by now. Jennifer Colleen, I am the homeowner at 12 Pineville Ave. So first, I just really want to start by thanking you all for your support and for the changes that have been made to the plans. A few just comments. One thing is, I think most of my neighbors would agree, it's still a very large development for 1 acre of land. And as much as we appreciate the changes, I think the comparison of these 30 units in retail space compared to what was originally proposed isn't necessarily a fair comparison, in that this might have been the place where we could have or should have started in terms of taking a look at this particular development. Things that I'm most concerned about right now is kind of trash mitigation because of the issues that we're currently dealing with in this particular neighborhood. The idea that they've doubled the dumpster capacity in the back concerns me. I know that, right now we kind of rely on the honor system, and the idea of that many residents and retail businesses kind of using that dumpster, it's just hard to really conceptualize how this would be managed well, is, I guess, based on kind of what we're dealing with. I mean, I don't want to review anything that we've already talked about. I mean, I think as a neighborhood where the plans look great, we're living something very different with kind of the activities behind 274 Main Street. And the worry is that now 258 Main Street might feel very similar. And oftentimes it feels like we really don't have any control. We don't have control over pest control. We don't have control over kind of waste that's in the street or on our properties. And, how moving forward could this look a little different so that we're not feeling like it's coming from both sides? I think from a neighborhood perspective is important. Obviously, as the owner of 12 Pineville, I have a few other concerns just specific to my property, part of which is just, it's hard for me to visualize like what the new landscaping looks like and kind of the berms with the fences. And I don't even know what an opaque fence is. But as grateful as I am for all of the changes, the way that the building has been kind of appointed in the middle of the property, it kind of creates a new visual issue for me in terms of when you come out of my backyard. With the garage being removed, it's kind of now a direct line of sight to this new building without the noise and visual buffers that I were previously there before. So I guess as a resident owning that property, I just really want a better understanding of kind of what does that really look like? What I appreciate the comment of kind of tagging those trees because it's helpful to know like which trees will remain and which will not, and having a better understanding of kind of the height, because it's hard to really differentiate that from the landscape plan. And, you know, where the 20-foot poles are going to be and those types of things, I think would be really important to me as a those are the things that are most important to me at the moment. I'm sure I'll have plenty to share as we have a better sense of kind of what it looks like.
I think that probably the engineers or the developer might be able to give you some examples or some locations where they would say, we've done something similar. We know there's something similar with a berm and a fence. If you wanted to go and see that, because it is hard to visualize when they say, you know, a berm with a fence, you don't know how high is 3 feet, what kind of plantings are on it. And looking at a flat plan, you can't visualize that.
Yes.
So maybe some locations that you guys could give the residents an idea so they could get a feel for maybe how it's going to impact their view or their backyard.
And I assume at the next meeting, we'll have a better understanding of kind of what that does look like and kind of where the fencing really is and.
Right, we didn't have a grading plan, so it's hard to really look and see how the grades go from the street to the back and exactly how the berm is shaped and how big the retaining wall is. I think you said you were going to use a block retaining wall.
She wouldn't see the wall from her property. You don't.
Right, it's on the
berm
berm side.
locked out.
Yeah.
Retaining wall with a screen fence. When I say screen fence, that's like a solid fence, whether it's vinyl or wood. I'm not sure yet. It would probably be vinyl would be my guess. Like a vinyl white fence.
Like a stockade type.
Yeah. The other piece that I put in my letter to all of you, which may be too much to ask, but the idea, considering dumpster challenges, I just wanted to inquire if there's any way to really bring back that internal trash room so that we're not dealing with as much extra capacity. I know we've talked a lot about the wildlife and the wetlands, where those dumpsters are, if they present similar problems than what we're seeing in the other adjoining properties right now, if there's just concern that there's going to be.
Yeah, and I don't know, the town must have some experience with that. I know the Reading Commons project on West Street, when they first built that, we had a lot of rats in the neighborhood. And there was a town, the residents had a meeting with town officials, and we haven't had any problems since. It was like one summer and fall. So obviously there was some kind of pest management that went in place, and that's a big open dumpster. They just walk up a ramp and throw stuff in. It's kind of.
Yeah, I mean, there's no preference or requirement for one or the other, but there's been noted challenges with interior trash rooms, both from the maintenance and use because of their size limitations, that they end up generally overfilled or overused or mismanaged and harder to access and use. So they haven't been idealized from the health department, but the hope and intent here would be through new development and property management agreements. Perhaps we can get a draft property management in terms of trash procedures and how many daily or weekly occurrences we might expect for a development of this size. We can start from there should the exterior trash remain. And we would be sure with conservation and close to the buffer that enclosure is properly structurally sound and used. So again, it's not required one way or the other, and I don't want to go as strong as a preference, but the interior trash management has had difficulties in other developments.
I mean, I guess one concern is that we haven't had a lot of success with
Right.
the concerns we've already raised in terms of rats and food debris on our properties, what we like to call pizza parties in our neighborhood. And if that's the case, you know, what's gonna be different in this situation? And that's really why I would also ask the board to consider like another restaurant or, you know, food establishment in that area. I mean, we can't manage the Domino situation. So what does that look like when we add yet another food establishment in that same area?
I feel like it's worth noting though that there weren't any open complaints about the Domino's until after this application process started. So the health department hadn't been there to investigate until I think maybe in December. So there weren't any, I'm just telling what the health inspector has told me, right? Which is that, so the Domino's has been there for a while. There weren't any like open complaints that they'd investigated. And since the neighbors have brought it up as an issue to them, she's been out there several times and is working with them to rectify the situation. She's taken looks, she's talked with Chuck about it. They're actively working on it, but from the health department's perspective, it's like a pretty new case. I know from the neighbor's perspective, you say this has been going on for a long time, but I just want to defend our health department and say that, you know, they are considering it like an active and open situation that they're working on, because from their perspective, they only became aware of it after this application was open and it started being worked on this fall. Just
I can't speak for the neighbors across the street, but I think that they, you know, the neighbors on that side of the street deal with the majority of it and I should let them speak for themselves, but I know, you know, when I say, you know, are you calling the town? It got to a point where the messaging was like, we've done everything we can do. And I think people got a little, you know, there's nothing that's going to resolve this. And I think as part of these meetings and this development, this is an opportunity for us to really have it addressed. So I would say the neighborhood became, you know, they didn't feel like there was an avenue to resolve the situation. So we didn't call every time there was piece of pizza on our windowsill, because, you know, squirrels like to put it there and come back the next day. But it has been, you know, an ongoing issue, and it's still not clear how it can adequately be resolved, although the public health director has been great and responsive. She's very nice.
Thank you.
If I could just to briefly comment, I mean, obviously, rats are a major concern. We recognize that. For a property like this is going to be state-of-the-art management. And it's in our best interest to make sure that this site is free of rats and kept clean and maintained, and trash is taken care of in an orderly fashion. My client's going to want to get as high of rents as possible, and you're not going to get those when you got rats running around the property. So, you know, it's in our interest as much as the neighbors. We want to see rats as little as you do, and maybe less than you do. So it's absolutely something we're going to be consideration as a top priority.
In addition, the dumpster enclosure proposed at this site is literally the dumpster enclosure they use at every Starbucks across the country. We've taken like their model dumpster enclosure and proposed it at this site and tweaked it for what we need. There'll also be a hose bib out there so that if there is liquids, they can wash them down and maintain the area. And just from my view of the other side of the street, that dumpster was clearly an afterthought, and there was really no thought put into that. I mean, this is going to be curbed. It's going to have a concrete pad. We've got access for the, you know, the dump trucks, and we've kept it as far away from the rest of the neighborhood as possible. And clearly the enclosure that we're using has been well thought out. You know, if you go to a Starbucks and look at the dumpster enclosure, that's the one we're proposing here.
do have people on Zoom too, so we're gonna jump over.
I'm Sarah Fuller, 24 Pinedale Ave. I just want to bring up one point very quickly regarding concern for flooding. Last time we talked about the water running off into the wetlands behind. And so that if you, could you pull up,
Sorry, give me one.
anybody pull up the shot where you see the number of the houses behind? Not sure if you have that, and Andrew.
Like the distance, I don't have that one.
Okay. There's tremendous amount of flooding issues behind this property. We see it all the time. It's wetlands. We know that's going to happen. However, even with some pumps, our basements get full a lot, standing water. And I'm just hopeful that we'll get a really clear understanding of what the water management plan looks like, and that it will take into consideration how high the water table already is directly behind this property. And that will be addressed in, further meetings.
I can respond to that if you like. In this proposal, we've put a substantial amount of water back into the ground. A lot of flooding comes when you have a lot of water and it runs off into an area and kind of flash floods. This stormwater is going to be taken into the ground and infiltrated slowly back into the groundwater. And if you're going to say, well, you're putting water back into the groundwater, it's literally like pouring a bottle of water into the ocean. I mean, once the water gets into the groundwater, it dissipates fairly quickly and it's not going to rise. We're not producing more water on the site than was going in there originally. We're just infiltrating it back into the ground. And we've met all the standard DEP guidelines. I know your town engineer has looked at it originally. He's going to look at it again. I know one of the board members here said he wanted to look into it further with the test pits once it was revised. So the stormwater is well designed. There's not going to be any flooding of anyone's basements. Everyone is substantially farther away from us than any mounding would take place, within the first 10 or 12 feet of an infiltration system. So we can get through any specific questions, but that's not a consideration I think we need to worry about here. Thank you.
Maybe to add to that, to bring it down to a more human level. So the stormwater management standards, the handbook that's this project will be required to comply with, and it's actually being updated now by DEP. It essentially requires that projects like this do no harm. So it can't be any worse than it is now. In most cases, it's better, because the situation where you have flooding, the reason why you have flooding is because there's a huge amount of water in a short period of time. So this kind of project, you have what are called best management practices, and they contain stormwater, and they delay how quickly it flows off site and how quickly it flows into the ground. It's strictly managed, and how those are maintained by the developer and the operator of the site. And the intent of that is to make sure that the water is getting released much more slowly than it would now, where you have these rain events where you've got a large amount of water just flowing directly off site into these wetlands and into the ground where it finds its way into place. So this kind of project is, we hope it'll have a improvement on the condition you're experiencing now.
Because we don't, right, at least the plans that are submitted, this version didn't have any right topography on it. Can you sort of go over for me, so at least I have in my head, and maybe others are thinking the same thing, what the existing, right, that you're going to regrade this site pretty dramatically, right? And right now, what's the drainage on the site? Where does it flow to? I think, does it flow mostly to Main Street, or?
Currently, it's, I would say probably up until about the transition line, it flows towards Main Street, and then kind of from the transition back approximately, it would flow back into the wetlands currently.
The transition line.
Is that
Right at the parking edge.
Probably 2/3 goes to Main Street and maybe 1/3 goes back based on the topo.
And so your plan has that all being treated on site as.
There's no stormwater discharging off the site that's not getting caught in our stormwater system. It will get caught in the catch basins and hard pipe to like a large underground infiltration system of chambers and stone. And then there'll be an overflow weir for emergency situations where you'd have a storm I couldn't account for, where it would flow back into the municipal system in Main Street. There's been an existing model done to calculate the peaks and volumes of water that goes to the rear and to the back. And then we've done a proposed model to show that we've done no harm. We've reduced or improved all those peak flows and volumes.
So, right, I'll get a little criticism, or I'll take a little shot at the way that the whole process is done, right? Because, and I don't think that it's a concern here, but tell me if I'm wrong here. So, right, there's this whole notion of do no harm, right? You got to now contain all your own stormwater on your site. What I understand on some other sites, either in this town or in others, right? Before we got as focused on stormwater, that there may be some sites that are serving as part of the stormwater system of their neighbors, right? So stormwater from their neighbor, right, would come in and be treated in one way or another, right, on that site, which may or may not be accounted for in the future, right? So I'm not 100% clear on what you're asking, but this site was kind of the tallest site around, right?
So we were flowing to others and we're bringing it down.
Yeah, and that's why from in this particular situation, I don't think that's a concern, because it was the tallest site. So it's not like this site was being used by any of its neighbors as part of their, right, stormwater wasn't flowing onto the site.
No.
Right, I know there's some skepticism that the way that we around town, the way that either we or the town or the town engineers looking at stormwater raises some concerns. This is not one of those conditions, is really what I'm getting at. So
in my experience is most systems that are designed to state standards are more or less over-engineered. And a good example is the stormwater management system within school. And when I was a conservation commissioner, we were permitting something there, and they wanted to use part of the overflow area for a playground. And I went up there on, I forget what storm it was, but it was more than 100-year storm, and there was about 4 inches of water in the bottom of the basin. So you see that a lot with these. I see them in my neighborhood. Stormwater systems. Most of them are pretty much over-engineered, assuming they're making the right assumptions on how water's.
Right, and that's the thing. Some of the math is assumption based, and so yeah.
Thank you.
we have some.
We got Debbie on the Zoom. That's them to unmute.
Hi, Debbie Rivera, 15 Pineville Ave. I want to share the concern about the flooding, the basement flooding. I hear all the management lingo and language, but I'm the victim of the flooding in behind the Fantasia building, and that's obviously supposed to be contained there, but it flows under their fence into the back of our yard. So I'm not sure how much management of that flooding is successful. I wanted to comment on the dumpster comment that Domino's has been there for many, many years, and it's just a very new concern about the rats. I want to make it clear for those that don't know that the dumpsters just arrived a couple of years ago without any input of the neighborhood. They were just put there. So the first summer they probably weren't a problem, and then after that it became an infestation in our backyards on the other side of the fence of the dumpster. So that's why it was not brought up as a concern years ago when Domino's was put there, because the dumpster was only put there a couple of years ago.
Can I interrupt you for a moment? Do you know how trash was being handled if there wasn't a dumpster there?
I believe the the businesses had their own, and there are a few individual trash cans with locks on them still at the back of the Fantasia building that someone uses privately, I guess. So I believe it was the Domino's folks that wanted the dumpster, had the dumpster built. I don't know, but each of the retail spaces had their own trash cans before the dumpster was put there.
Okay, thank you.
That's why it's a fairly new, although we didn't complain about it immediately. We tried to give it some patience and hope it would be taken care of, and it wasn't, and now it's become an infestation. But the dumpster is what brought it back to our backyards. My question that I had was on the fence. I understand the fence is going around the entire project, but I see at one point in the fence, it looks like behind 10 Pinevale, it looks like a dotted line versus a solid line. And so my question is at any point in this fence, are there going to be gates or openings so that the people in the project can be accessing Pinevale Ave, or is this a solid fence?
Hi, this is Carlton. The dash line, that's a proposed easement line in that location, and there is a fence proposed right in front of that. So the fence is going all the way around the property. There is no proposed gates on it as we speak. If someone wants a gate put in, I suppose we could, but it's going to be solid all the way around.
Okay, but so number 10 is owned by the same owner as the mixed-use building. So if the owner proposes a gate or a fence, it seems that would be a very viable possibility.
Yeah, I don't see why not unless there's a concern. I'll put a gate there.
Are you pro gate or against gate?
I am not pro gate. I am proposing that the gate be, that the fence be a solid fence without access to Pinevale Ave.
We're happy to agree to a no gate condition.
If you did have a gate,
And in the future, does that prevent in the future, because it's the same owner of the property, for them to change their mind on that?
It's currently the same owner of the property, but I think the intent is to probably sell it at some point, so.
Which is why, right, which is why you want to make sure that there's an easement there so that the site can be sold in the
but I
future.
think if you had a gate there, people coming from Pinevale would have to go on private property to access it, so it's not
Yeah.
legal for them.
I don't think it's the people on Pinevale Ave that have an issue with wanting to access any of the project property. I think it's the other way around.
Yeah, no gate. Well, we're happy to go with the no gate condition. I think that's a concern.
That was just my question. I don't know what everybody else on Pinevale feels about that, but I just wanted to clarify what the intention was.
Yeah, the intention is to provide a solid screen fence all the way around.
Thank you. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Lynn Farrell, 2 Pinevale. I have a question why they moved the driveway at 10 Pinevale from one side to the other. I'm not quite sure I understand why they did that.
The idea is to make more room on the other side for landscaping, so that there's more of a buffer to 12 and also the neighbors up in Pineville.
But that leaves no buffer on the other side.
So we can walk you through the landscaping plan, but there's quite a bit of landscaping that's being proposed. I don't know if you have that. Yeah, there it is. You see there's landscaping all along the property line there, as well as all the way down the entire property line. And those are TS, is that Green Giant?
I believe so.
Those are arborvitae, so those are fast growing trees. Those will be 25 feet tall before you know it.
Are there others online or?
Not seen any.
In the back there? See you with your hand up for a little.
Really didn't want to, oh, Linda McKenzie, 7 Pinevale Ave, across the street from 10 Pinevale Ave. I didn't want to spend all my time talking about dumpsters, but it's kind of
Here we
a
are.
big deal. It's hugely a big deal. So Fantasia Building used to have plastic barrels in the back of their property, and everyone took care of their trash that way. And it began to overflow. And then we started to have an animal problem, rats, mice, animals. I did complain to the Board of Health. At the time, we had a different Board of Health. It changed. Don't we have a brand new one now? We have new people. Anyway, a different person talked about it, went through the whole thing. Don't know if that's when the dumpsters showed up, but that was kind of it, that these overflowing barrels were a problem. So I kind of surmised that might have been the reason the dumpsters showed up. So the dumpsters are very much like the Starbucks dumpsters that we talked about. Starbucks with the gate, the giant gate around it, and the closed dumpster inside. And if people keep it closed, I imagine it's okay. If people keep the gates closed, I imagine that works too, although I can't imagine they just can't climb over the gates, but that's beside the point. So the problem is not the dumpsters and the plan of the dumpsters. The problem is the people who are taking care of them, the people who are putting the trash in, whether they're closing them or not, whether they're closing the gates. And we've driven by, I'm sure Deb is still on, we've driven by regularly that the Domino's dumpster is open regularly. The gates are open regularly. It's not just the Domino's dumpster. There's the dumpster over at Carter and Coleman. It's always open. They never close that. So I don't understand what that dumpster is all about. And it's also right where the wetlands are, where I want to say swamp, and that's not the correct term, but there's a wetlands there. There was a very big deal when they were building Carter and Coleman, and that they had to be very careful to protect that. Well, the dumpster is right there. So I listened to you talk about the seepage from dumpsters. I think, oh, right, why don't we just dump it right in there? So all of this is happening. So in the meantime, walking around, and I know more about the neighborhood now too, because I've retired and I have a little dog that likes to walk all the time. And so I know how this stuff all works together more than I even want to. So as I see this happening, I think, okay, so we're going to build this great big project, which my point tonight would have been, it's too big. You have to cut it back. It has to be smaller. You can't put that giant project in that little space and not expect all kinds of things to overflow into our neighborhood, which is really unfair because we have rights as residents there too. And we have a right to say, no, we don't want this here right up against us. Anyway, back to the dumpsters. So the idea is if it's so poorly managed, and it's not because it was built wrong, it was put in the wrong place, it's so poorly managed. And when I call and complain, that I get a good response, and they come out and they watch the truck dump the thing, and they go through the whole thing, and the covers are back on, and they lock it up, and they say, yeah, we're gonna do a really good job. The next day, it's wide open again. The stuff is all happening. You can see in the ground where I suppose the animals are living, because there are holes in the ground right under the dumpster. So this stuff is so poorly managed and taken care of that I don't believe that the next project is going to be any better. And we can talk about all kinds of new plans and we manage things better, we manage water. Well, the fact is in Carter and Coleman, when you walk by on a rainy day, their whole front lawn is covered with water. It's soaking wet. So that is because of the wetlands, and they have adapted to that. And this is going to continue, and our neighborhood is wet. We have a problem with that. We have problems in our basement, and I can't, after the project's in, there's no going back, and there's nobody else. And we don't come and see you again when we have a problem. You're here right now, but when we have a problem, it's not dealt with the same way, and we have to try to figure out how to solve our problem when it's already built. So that is why we are here, and that is why we are so passionate about this, because these are our homes, and I'm staying in my home. I'm not leaving. I'm not going to go to some condominium or somewhere. I'm going to stay in my home, so I'm going to make sure it's safe And the way to keep it safe is to make sure it doesn't have water, it doesn't have rats, it isn't overpopulated, it doesn't have noise and too much light and all the things that would make living in my home unlivable. So that is why I'm here. And as I said, the most important point is it's too big. You need to cut it back. It can't be the size it is for that little space. Find a bigger space or make it smaller. Thank you.
I do, and then yeah.
We'd like to respond at some point, but I'll.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
I'm Ryan McClanahan, 239 Main Street. And I actually agree with Linda, what she's saying here. The other thing too, that since I've lived in my apartment for like 20 years, I've noticed, well, so a few things I've noticed. The first thing is that Main Street is very, the traffic is very heavy. And this might make it a little bit more difficult. So like I walk everywhere. I don't drive. So when I have to like cross Main Street, it takes me like probably like 15, 20 minutes. And it's a little bit easier in the summertime than it is in the winter. Can't see. And crosswalks are a suggestion. So, you know, I've been, well, we in my building, we really need to have like a push button crosswalk. And either that or traffic needs to like slow down. Like, so now it's what, at 45 miles per hour? So maybe 25 or 30, like max, because that's, it's dangerous. So the other thing too is I now live like right next to like a giant monstrosity that was built like last year or the year before. And so we've seen like the water table is really like, we have more water in our backyards now than we did before when that thing was put in. So we also see that there's more animals too that are raiding our dumpster. And I also see too, Starbucks, they're like she was saying, the dumpster isn't really maintained. So you can have everything on paper that it looks great, but it's completely different in real life and reality than what is on paper. So I just want to bring these things up to you guys. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
One of the issues with pedestrian crosswalks and speed limits is that's a state highway. So that's a Mass DOT jurisdiction. So and Mass DOT has their specific requirements if you want to make changes to speed limits or put in additional crosswalks or things like that. We do have a complete streets plan for the town and work with Mass DOT where we have issues that need to be addressed on their highways with respect to that, but I'm not sure where that is in the priority.
Just for the safety of everybody around, including the people who are either going to live there, or if you're going to have a restaurant, which that would be awesome. But if you're going to have like a restaurant there, that could be a separate safety issue too, depending on how late the restaurant is open.
So obviously with the size of the existing apartment buildings there and with this project. And I think one of the residents brought up during construction, the sidewalks are going to be limited. So there may be an opportunity to look at putting in some sort of a, what they call a hawk unit, a push button light at Knollwood or somewhere like that.
That's what I was thinking, because that's the most.
Right.
Spots.
We were successful a number of years ago now. It seems like not too long ago, but of putting that, putting the crosswalk in at the end of Minot.
Yep.
Which believe it or not was a bit of a fight.
Yep. There was.
I can't understand that, but to your point, right, like it was not a, let's put a sidewalk in there. And that, I think if I remember correctly, the support was the numerous accidents, severe accidents that happened in that location. But maybe, with, especially, with the additional residential in here, like the one that was built, that there's support there.
Yeah, I'm happy
to say the other, the other crosswalk is way up at, right? Is that Summer Street?
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing between Summer and Minot, right? So that doesn't work.
There is a crosswalk at bottom of Knoll.
Is there?
Yeah.
I see it.
It has yes, yeah, because it's in the middle of that strip where everyone's just playing.
You can see when they're going down, that there is one until it's too late.
Yeah, yeah.
The lack of lights and resting stops is the concern on crosswalks across Main Street.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, there should be one that stops traffic somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, let me see what I can poke at PTTF and who we can poke at MassDOT, just
Yeah.
take a look.
Good evening, Mike Farrell, 2 Pinevale Ave. Just a couple reminders. One is we have a proposed meeting with me and someone to go through the fence and the sound barrier. But just want to make sure that doesn't fall apart and get forgotten. The other thing is, last meeting, I said I had concerns about damage to my building. I haven't seen that addressed.
Damage to your building during construction?
During construction,
All right.
if there's damage, I'm paying to help build the building, is that what it means?
Maybe the applicant can.
Thank you.
So obviously for this kind of construction, there will be no incursion beyond the property line. Typically what happens in a construction project like this is the construction company will establish what's called the limit of work. It'll be inside the property line and it's typically a snow fence or something like that. And it's something best practices are to have it be bright colors. So when it's snowy out, you don't have construction workers coming in, driving their trucks over it or things of that nature. So there's no intent to be anywhere near your property or to cause damage of it. If something were to happen in the worst case and there were to be some damage to your property, which is extremely unlikely, the developer will of course be on the hook for that. And we would be paying to repair that, not the other way around.
So when you build, there's gonna be a lot of vibration. How do you stop the vibration from crossing the property line?
So there vibrations, that's something that comes up a lot in, for example, in blasting, when you're excavating, there's no blasting that I'm aware of proposed for this site, but it's strictly managed by EPA of how much vibrations can be generated, how much noise can be generated. And it's strictly regulated to keep that down to a point where vibration levels on the project site, even though it's 80 feet away from your house, they don't rise to the level where they're going to be damaging the structure.
But if there is, you would be responsible.
Correct.
So that can be written into the agreement.
So often, right, at least in my experience, often when you're doing construction and there's some concern of that there might be some vibration damage, not that I think there's concern, but you have concern. So right. Right, typically you do a joint inspection specifically, right, of your foundation beforehand. You right, there are probably some cracks in there. We all have cracks in our foundation. So you sort of document it all, take pictures, see what it all is, and then everyone has a baseline. It's sort of typical, right?
Yeah, for blasting.
Yes.
So your mind went to the same place mine did. It's not a bad idea in your situation where you're so close to have a walkthrough and make sure that everybody, it's documented and
available almost anytime.
Okay.
You would not do that without us being there.
Of course not.
correct?
No, we wouldn't go anywhere near your property without your permission.
And the town will have construction oversight, making sure that the town standards are met. So for instance, if someone's starting their diesel excavator at 6 a.m, then the police will come and say, you can't start it till 7 a.m. Town engineer will come by and make sure that they're following the plans. And if there are any issues, then call the engineering department and someone will address that. And there will be a superintendent on site too, also.
With contact information for if you have any issue during construction, there'll be a name, a phone number, 24 hours a day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else on?
I have not seen any hands.
Right.
So just if I may,
Sure.
Mr. Chair, just, and I don't want to belabor the point, but the neighbors have obviously expressed a lot of concerns tonight and at previous hearings, and I know everybody is aware of this, but I think it bears pointing out that a lot of the concerns that we're talking about are other properties and other projects, right? So this is not Carter and Coleman, this is not Domino's Pizza, this is not the building across the street. This is not the Fantasia building, this is a new project. And I think what we've tried to demonstrate with the neighbors is we're sensitive to your concerns, we're responsive to them. We are aware that these are major concerns that you have and are willing and committing to you tonight to manage them appropriately in accordance with all of the applicable environmental and construction protection laws that are there for your benefit. We ask the neighborhood that you give us a chance to show that we can comply with those. And as all developers are afforded when a project is approved. And we think that what we submitted, we look forward to submitting with a fully realized set of documents which show the foibles that are in the latest set, everything coordinated appropriately, shows and demonstrates compliance with those laws. And we look forward to demonstrating to the neighborhood that we will comply with those.
So I think that, right, I forget who said it, right? But, right, the point of the plan set that you submitted was to get feedback to understand whether you were headed in the right direction, knowing still, right, there was, as you just mentioned, there's details there to work out. Certainly, like you heard a lot about trash tonight, that's a detail that in lighting, stormwater, those are all sort of the additional details that need to be worked out. I guess I for one, and this is just speaking as myself, not as a board, feel that the plan that you submitted this time around, addressed, some of the, I'm going to say, the critical concerns that I had on previous iterations, and personally feel like, that it would not be a waste of your time to continue with the design, furthering that design.
Thank you.
We can look at those details.
And I agree. I think, the issues that I've had with the plan, number one was there was too much impervious area on previous submittal. The access from Pinevale was a problem. The location of the building and the mass of the building was an issue. Sliding that farther to the south and reducing the footprint, as well as the upper floor, I think addresses most of my issues. And I think, obviously the residents would prefer not to have a building there or have a much smaller building, but I think that this is a good compromise for what could be developed there and what you proposed.
Yeah, right. I guess I'll say, I recognize, right, something is going to be developed there, right? You're right. It's a viable commercial set of parcels there. So the option to have nothing or something relatively small is really not, not an option here.
And we've been having public meetings about our MBTA communities zoning, and a lot of the public comment is to have more projects like this instead of little projects in neighborhoods. So we've got to kind of balance that out. This is you know, a business zone, and so it's obviously be nice to have a park there or something. But except the residents wouldn't want it.
Talk about noise, right?
Maybe we can give you a key to the gate that will not be there.
Other comments or, right?
I think March 12th.
March 11th.
March 11th.
Just so March 11, and the plans need to be in a week, at least a week in advance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Motion to continue the project at 252, 258, 10 Pineville Ave. I'm sorry, 252, 258 Main Street, 10 Pineville Ave to March 11th.
Second.
Roll call vote, Tony,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
John, yes, Hillary,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
right?
Thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
It is. Toasty in here.
It's really still on.
Sleepier.
Do we want to take, I guess I'd like to take like a 2-minute.
Right, I'm gonna unmute these.
Bless you.
We got her.
Thank you.
Your warranty.
Thank you, Jack. It just fell. By the way. Mine does too.
That gets cotton rollers. All right.
All right.
Next item on the agenda is, where are we at? I'm gonna guess it's MBTA Communities, but
It is.
that's just a guess.
So I don't think, it's not, hopefully not a long discussion tonight. We just wanted to make sure, I think we had provided that memo in context, wanted to make sure if there's any feedback on that, can we parse it down, simplify it? Is there any more clarity we can give to some of the next steps? If you felt anything was lacking there, and we're happy to do that before posting that fully. So I guess I'll start there. I think what we had tried to do in that memo is summarize the process and the feedback to date, and where some of the actionable items that we're pulling from that are headed towards in some of these alternative concepts for modeling. I know it was maybe a bit lengthier than expected, but we thought it was good to put it all in context and put it all out there, because from here on out, some of that might get forgotten. So any feedback on that, we're happy to start there.
I'll start off. I thought it was good to have all of that background in one place. I think I do think it accurately reflected where I thought we were and where we were going. Admittedly, I glazed over the affordable housing section because there's a lot there. I think it's all right, but that's the one part I honestly didn't get into. I guess my one suggestion would be that as we describe the different alternative concepts, there's like a mix. The descriptions have a mixture of description and then potential limitation, and then a little bit of description, and then like being more clear about, I think it's fine to lay out some of the limitation, but clearly state that that's what that's what's being discussed is limitation to the concept, instead of mixing it into the description.
Okay.
I think if that makes sense.
Yep. Yep.
In sections A, B, and C.
Yes. Yes.
That makes sense. Can separate those out.
It's a lot of words. Like, it's kind of overwhelming, I think.
The Renton memo. We went back and forth on it. I think with the primary feedback we've been getting in between meetings, being people saying, I do not know what the status of this project is, right? And also, I have just arrived to this process. What were the previous steps of the process, right? So I think we anticipate those continuing to be the two biggest questions we get from the public, right? Which is like, what has happened? And if I am just arriving to the process,
What did I miss?
yeah, what did I miss? And I missed a lot if they're just arriving.
Yes.
Part of it, and also to lay out, I think, really like demonstrate what we did here in the public hearings and how we want to carry that forward. It is a lot of words.
It is.
From the public hearings, was there any conclusions? I mean, it seemed like, the initial public hearing was all people that were in the proposed zone. And then as you start looking at other ideas, you get mixed feedback on that. And I didn't, and when you change zoning, everyone's thinking about how's it going to affect me. So I didn't know if there was some sort of a consensus or feeling of which of the options was most favorable or would have less impact on the nature of the community.
I don't think so just yet, and I think that's where we're headed tonight to say like, we're likely, our intent and hope is that we bring one concept, one, I guess, zoning amendment per concept to you guys in the near future, so that we can further vet them out and see if any, kind of fall off the table immediately, or some start to push ahead more than others in terms of viability of housing and growth and and limitations of impacts, or however we describe that. So I think we'd like to get them further vetted and conceptualized before we, say one's better than the other, or more likely than the other, or whatever that ends up being. So hopefully that meets, you guys agree with that. And if not, we're happy to run a bit more, but we were hopeful that we'll look to strategize one per concept from what we've heard to date, and what we can try to find is, strong professional reasonings in each, bring them to the table, discuss their strengths and weaknesses, and then go from there, if that makes sense for the process. And Tom, jump in anytime.
Yeah, Tom, do you have your hand up, or is that left over?
No, I do have my hand up, I think. I thought the meeting was, that we had, the last one was good. I have one question area I wanted to bring up a bit, but I do agree that I think what we need to do is to focus on where we've been, so that we don't end up rehashing it pre-November vote. And by that I mean, just take parking as one issue. We started at, I think the current regulation is 1.5. We backed it down in our plan proposal to 1.25. We got feedback that they didn't think that was as good, and we pushed it back up to 1.5. But that's just an example of how I think we ought to look at some of these things. The one issue, and I wanted to be sure on this, that I guess we may be closing a hearing or so, that whatever we're closing is maybe phase 1 and we're going into phase 2, and we can receive comments, written comments from the public between now and when we reconvene the really public sessions. Am I correct on that, Andrew?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think, yep, tonight, if all agree, we'd close the public hearing, go back to kind of what was the prior process of putting it under other business when we can tackle it, have the board discussions, and then reopen to the public at large, whether through those forums and workshops, and then the public hearings.
Yeah, well, where I'd like to go on that is, in my view, and it may not be others, that I think we're fairly close. If there is some portion, which I think, in my view, undoubtedly, there will be some portion that is in the current area of our last draft map that is out there. And I think we're close on agreement on a number of those issues. There's some that are a little bit open, but I think we're very close on those issues. And I'd like to kind of close down those openings or get more information. In the category of get more information, I know that it had been suggested, and I had echoed some kind of approval in going up to 12 months on the moratorium for, quote, historic properties. But I don't feel I have enough information on that. And I'd like you to reach out, if you can, to whoever is appropriate. I know I went back to my notes, and I think Mr. Barnes spoke on that, if I have his name correct. But go back to other, that organization, whatever it is, and get more information, so I can figure out whether my ideas on, or our group ideas maybe on going to from 6 to 12 months are appropriate, or whether it's just nothing. In other words, might we be better off approaching that issue with regard to some kind of design scheme, proposed design ideas. The issues that I'd like to be addressed maybe in that area is, we all know that, I'll call it the Reading Historical Society versus the historic district are under different kinds of definitions. So I really need to understand Reading's definition of the historical grouping that it has. I'd like to know where those properties are in there, and I'd like to know the differences between their definitions and the conditions that they would propose on these properties versus the historic district or whatever the Commonwealth may have as its recognized historic areas as well too. Because for some reason, this grouping has chosen, well, maybe they have, maybe they haven't, but they haven't yet finalized anything in a historic district that's recognized nationally.
So I think there has been through this process, right? There's a lot of discussion on historic district and changes to, the historic, controls, right? I'll put it that way. That is going to be, as I understand it, that's going to be a separate issue and process than MBTA communities. There was a slight discussion at one point about maybe putting that on the same warrant, but those are essentially two separate issues with two separate.
Correct.
They're not completely separate, right? But from what's that?
So they have separate governing bodies.
Yeah, true. They have separate governing bodies, separate bylaws. We would address them separately at town meeting.
Yeah, I think
so. I just want to make sure that, right, the two are somewhat related because they came up together, but the way that those will progress will be under separate processes.
Yeah, so 3 points to that, quick points. I think all along we've said if this is really of interest to the town and historic committee, you should do this with or without this zoning change, and we're happy to support them on that initiative regardless. Two, we are going to have a joint meeting with HDC and RHC next week just to tidy up some loose ends, close the loop. Is this something we really want to do? Bring this to November, all those things, kind of run through them. And three, our hope as staff too is, as we not only just run through these other concepts, but potentially we've thought of the idea of how we can do almost like a booklet, FAQ booklet. We have the sheet, we have the page, but if we can go through parking and say, this is how we ended up here, if we can go through historic and just give a quick paragraph or two and explain, this is what this is, and this is how it works, and this is why it is or is not included in this capacity, and kind of hit all these different areas that we've talked through, site plan review, kind of formalize them a bit for the website and in like a FAQ handout version so that we don't have to keep going back to the conversations over again.
And I guess go ahead, Tom.
John, I just kind of want to understand a little bit where you're coming from. With regard to the scope of our MBTA on the issue of historic, are you saying or believing that we don't need to go any further? That that's a separate issue and we don't need to change any of our regulations based on that issue?
I think that those regulations should or should not be advanced, no matter what we do with MBTA communities.
Okay. Does that mean that, because I precipitated in this one conversation, though, but does that mean that we shouldn't consider, for example, going from 6 months to 12 months as a moratorium? I mean, I can see where it should be shifted. But is that what we're saying?
I leave that up to RHC.
Yeah, I think that's a separate discussion than MBTA communities.
Okay, okay.
It's also outside of our purview.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. That's fine. I just wanted, to me, I'll even go a little step further. From where we are and the number of meetings we've attended and the workshops we've attended and things like that, we're almost close to finalizing the issues if part of the MBTA area is within our last map. And we've talked about traffic, we've talked about parking, We've got our setbacks that we thought of, our building dimensions. I'm just trying to think if there's really an open, I mean, everything obviously is open for final review, but I'm just trying to think if there's really a topic that we haven't discussed that we need more information on, if any part of the housing is in MTBE or MBTA area.
Well, I do think, right, I think that we came to a consensus that the concept that we've been working on developing, right, it's not A, B, or C, but it's, what is that?
Option one.
Option one,
It's just,
right?
yeah. Something's wrong.
Option one, we did resolve all the outstanding issues, and that is that is a near complete concept. Whether we want to bring that to town meeting or not, I think it depends. It depends on how concepts A, B, and C progress, and whether those or some combination. But I don't feel like we can or should spend any more time on option one in any substantial way, right? As you said, Tom, we resolved all the outstanding details of the zone, right? The big question is that what people want? Yeah, right. So
yeah, and where it's kind of coming down to is if we can come up with some other places in A, B, or C, maybe section one gets reduced in dimension somewhere somehow. So I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just wanted to make sure that we understood what we were looking at, so that if there were any outstanding facts that we needed, we got those facts before us during this spring hiatus, so to speak.
I will say the only question outstanding on option one, at least in my mind, is there any way we can get down below the 22 units per acre?
Okay.
Question. Happy to try to explore it further, but to date, I have not been able to get that number any lower.
Not even removing the areas that would not be counted?
Right. Right. It all comes down to getting those lots into the by right and counting to the 3 units.
And if you did a 50-foot setback and frontage instead of 60, would that add enough for lots?
Frontage might not. I think I had tried to play through some ideas of lot coverage or setbacks, but I didn't think that they were in, to try to lower the density. I didn't think it was starting to get out of the realm of scale that we were thinking of. But I'll keep trying. See if we
Tony, going along with what you said, one of the only areas I can think is that while I'm a proponent of affordable housing, I could leave affordable housing, and it doesn't bother me, at 10% within our current geographical area that we're considering. Although if we go outside that area and identify something else for those structures that might be, 40, 50, 100 units in it, I could consider something of a higher percentage in those units.
Yeah, so we're gonna run through some economic feasibility analysis specific to commercial zones and potential floors there to try to get a higher percentage there, should that alternative be the one that starts to move forward. We agree that higher affordability could probably be done, at least to a certain extent. So we're happy to explore that. And then there's other kind of crazy ideas that I'm thinking through too, to try to get even more, like expanding smart groups.
Yeah, just to clarify that, but economic feasibility analysis would be done after we have the geography and the zoning.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with that, because it's really tough to do it on the current area that we've drawn. If you don't know where the area is.
Yeah.
I agree. So it's not really feasible. And I'd hate to undergo a study there because it wouldn't produce any results. Whereas if we identify another piece of property, it might.
Yeah, exactly. We tie it to more higher intensity uses and unit capacity like you mentioned, so.
Okay.
Happy to take more questions before I move on to my third point question. The third kind of set that we have before we start, again, pushing concepts to bring to you guys is, I guess, do we have self-prescribed limitations, whether in acreage, which I think is hard to do because it depends on the zone and area, or maybe more specifically in the unit capacity? Or do we really feel like, let's bring the zoning forward, kind of like we did here, bring it forward and just see what the numbers are here and either work it down from there or say this is just the zoning concept that is fitting for this area. Or I guess, do we, again, want to self-prescribe 2,000 unit capacity, 1,500, 2,500, I don't know. We're not as focused on the unit capacity, but there are, certainly, I get underlying reasons to consider it.
We also don't have the ability or time to go through a whole series of size revisions to multiple concepts.
Yeah, and we're cognizant of continuous map changes again and again, because it had a little bit of confusion at the end of the public hearing process. So we just want to try to nail it down if we can.
I guess I sort of thought that there were some physical rational limitations on the areas that you had in mind. And I also think that along with your knowledge about what is conceivable limits of the town of Reading, what would fit, right? Like there are no 10-story buildings, right? That's not going to be, you're not going to utter those words, right? That means, it's not feasible, right? So to me, like because there's geographic limits and there is some form limits that I think that we have, that I'm not, I guess I didn't really think that you could get too far out from where, in unit count than what we were talking about before.
Right. I mean, I don't think that figuring out what, your drive lane and all that, but like, what can that zone support, right? Like if it's 4 stories, if we do take over the industrial zone, like, what does that mean? I don't think it's like.
I think there's some decisions about, you could say 3-story buildings or 6-story buildings. You can try to cram it all in as close to 43 acres as possible, right? Or not, right? Within the kind of like MR design, we had submitted maps that ranged in acreage, right? With varying unit capacity, zoning capacity.
Right.
And I think, at least in the public hearing process, we didn't hear a lot of support for anything that was larger than the minimum.
Yeah.
I don't know how representative the members of the public hearing process were of town meeting, right? Which is the question we've been having all along.
Yeah.
How representative for our members of our earlier workshops of town meeting? I think that's something that's certainly open for debate.
I guess the other thing, you understand also what's actually buildable. I mean, what could actually be done, and I think my perception is, right, there's this play between what you might be able to get on paper and get through it, but may never get built. There is a problem to be solved here. Maybe not, we might not have to solve, everything, but I think we don't want to create a zone that would produce zero.
Right. Non-viable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not?
What?
Why not?
Some of you're playing devil's advocate.
When you say produce zero, like on paper, produce zero? Or
Well,
no one would ever do it?
no one would ever do it.
Yeah.
No one would ever utilize it.
So that's kind of, we're creating a zone to encourage multi-unit development. But do we really care if there is multi-unit development in that zone?
There has been, right, this board has, over the years, right, really focused on providing different forms of housing, right?
Yeah.
And I guess I personally don't want to go through this whole process and have this not create something.
But what I got out of, especially the first public hearing, was the NIMBY. I agree with this, we need to have more housing, but I don't want it in my neighborhood.
Right.
And so we have to do something. And so there may be some development, but you're not gonna have 1,500 units.
Yeah, no, that's,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, I'm not saying that you need to, right,
Build to the max.
build to the max, and it won't be.
And it won't be.
It won't.
Right, it won't.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So if you had a zone that you say, well, there's probably never gonna be any multifamily development there, but it helps you zone this other area and get public approval. See what I mean?
Kind of get what you're saying.
But rather than saying, well, we need to make sure we can develop everything within the zone. Say, we know we can in this zone, but these, to make sure we're spreading it evenly, we have to look at these others.
Or take a zone that's industrial. And I'm gonna throw out raw numbers just for example. Make it 40 units per acre. But that allows you to have your S15 residential zone down to 16 or 17.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's like the play of like our mixed, right, of option B.
And depending on what we choose for the industrial, in the next decade, they're not gonna be built. I can
Yes.
say that Home Depot and Jordan's are not going to go residential tomorrow, no matter what we zone.
Right,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think we should-
Stop and shop on that site anyways.
Stop and shop could, correct.
I think we
Right.
just want to be cautious that we don't want to zone for something that we don't actually ever want, right? And I think some people are imagining
Yes.
zoning over those areas because they think it's never going to be built, but once the zoning's there, it exists, right? And so I think one of the things in our analysis is just being really cautious about that idea,
yes.
which is that we don't actually want to zone for something that we would not ever
Actually
want
want.
built.
Right.
There's a very good possibility that somebody at some point,
It's gonna.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
let's do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we try to address the needs of whatever geography is kind of chosen, and so that's the realm that we try.
I think one thing to go back, I think it was Tony that said it with regard to our last application. I know I have not phrased this right, Tony, but it was something like, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about landing one of these facilities outside the current MBTA area. The only difficulty is the Pine Valley, Pine Vale is only about 1 acre of property and we need 5 acres. So there's one thing I do want to understand, and that is if we find a spot or if you find a spot, I want to know what are the residential areas around that area that we're going to have difficulty with in terms of, getting that site built or maybe never built. Because I think we've all seen, a small version of that with this last application. And this applicant, I think, has done a decent job in trying to respond to the community. But
I forget which meeting, maybe I think it's the last meeting, I don't know, right, Tom? There is not a parcel in Reading that is sizable like that is not abutting a residential property.
I think you're probably right.
Or two in the industrial zone, right? And that's, so pretty much no matter what is done, it will have residential abutters.
Right, and that's where our controls come in, where we probably say a stronger rear setback on South Main Street than maybe other
Then,
areas.
yes.
And so, right, so factoring all of that in, that's something we'll definitely be doing.
Yeah.
Be cognizant of going with whatever concepts we bring forward, so.
Sounds like you guys are with us in saying that you generalize all of your opinions, but that maybe you are less concerned about the zoning capacity numbers and more interested in the actual build out projections or how likely things are to be developed. And is that fair to say? Yes.
That's fair to say. The only problem is because we came out with the original large district, which is what we heard from the prototype meeting, where everybody was going, yeah, it's a great idea. Make it even, please, bring it up to Lowell Street and so forth. But then when we came out and said, okay, so that gives us a maximum total of X thousand, people went, that many, we can't support that. It's like, it's not all gonna be built.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think to your point, wherever we're looking at isn't gonna drastically overachieve the numbers we ended up around. It can be 1,500 to 2,500, 3,000, somewhere in there.
I think the one issue to look at and the big distinction, and this kind of came up when I was trying to take a look at market basket area. There is a difference of the developer that is going to develop that property than is going to develop properties within the area that we've currently chosen. You got a well-heeled developer, and that's going to sink a lot of people in one area and maybe sending them to one elementary school, hypothetically, and things like that. So there's a whole different thought pattern that goes into sinking a large number of residents in 5 acres. And it'll be built out sooner than Mary has projected her 10-year plan. It would take to come close to even building out the area chosen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all correct.
Yeah. I don't think we're like finding 5 acres. We're just, again, looking at corridors, pockets, and those natural boundaries that make sense. So otherwise, that was all of the questions we had.
So other comments, questions?
And we do have members of the public.
So, right, we're still public meeting, MBTA communities. I don't know if anyone has any comments, questions. I'm talking more about, right, process really than the details of any proposal.
Andrew, anybody on Zoom?
Question?
No hands raised.
No hands raised.
I do have. So Sri Narayan, 16 Pineville. So when we are doing the zoning, are we preventing, or is there any regulation that prevents a certain area to be built out to where, like what happened near Pineville, where some developer comes in and buys, like I'll just pick Center Street, which is, you know, in the middle of nowhere near the railway station. Like somebody buys one and then buys another, and then buys like an entire area, and now they have whatever, 1.5 acres, and they're just building it into big housing. But I mean, once they have the right to build, then do we have a way to stop that from happening? Because then the entire neighborhood is like the nature of that neighborhood completely changes. Like, do we have anything like that, or have you thought of doing that? Or is there even a possibility to do that? Because this law is very open-ended. It's kept like 3 lines. Do this, do this, do this, yeah.
I mean, so the limitations of restricting conjoining lots is very unclear. There's no precedent set for it, and it's, you know, again, just murky at best if we ever tried to do that on the limitations of conjoining lots. And so I think for certain scales, we were, more willing to try to explore that further, potentially, but I just think it's gonna be pretty hard to get by the AG and others to say you can't conjoin lots that to do a by right development.
That's what I was asking, like,
Yeah.
even to be able to do that.
Yeah.
In your hypothetical, the problem becomes that in Reading, your average house is 810,000. For somebody to buy 4 or 5 as 15 lots at $800,000 apiece makes the project untenable, because he's just spent $4 million. If he can buy 1 lot for 800,000 and put up, say, a duplex instead of 3 units or 5 units, whatever, it's going to cost him less to do the duplex than it is to go out and buy them all.
Right.
Now, in my neighborhood, I have seen several lots of older buildings that were in disrepair that have been purchased. They were already zoned as 2 families. The price was about 600,000 per house, which gives you 300,000 per lot, per unit. And they put up 2 families on each, brand new 2 families. They've done it 5, maybe even 6 times in my neighborhood. And that's the economics that you're gonna be looking at. Nobody's gonna go and spend $4 million.
No, well, what I mean is to use that lot to make it into luxury houses that you sell, right? Like if you think of, I forget the name, Veterans Way or whatever, the one that was off Main Street, there was like 5 or 6 houses that came in, they're like each like $1 million and something.
Right, but they already had that lot. There was a large lot that they then subdivided into $1 million homes.
Oh,
Yeah.
And that was the same in my neighborhood, off Howard Street. The developer owned some landlocked area, about 2 houses fronting on Howard Street, tore those down and built $6.5 million homes. So he ended up buying, he owned 1 lot, bought 2 more, but I don't think if he had to buy 6 lots to do that, he could afford to do it.
That, and I think even in this MBTA, once it hits 3 units, it comes back to CPDC. So you have, the neighborhood has that discussion capability, which I think is what you're asking is like, how can we?
How can we,
What's
we have some say in the whole.
Once it hits 3, it comes back here and, we have this process.
Okay, that makes sense. And the other thing was, I know in one of the presentations, Andrew, you had like 22 units per acre. Is that something that, because if you look at the MBTA law, it's just open-ended. It doesn't say how much you can put in, right? So is that something that we are doing, or is it?
That was a self-prescribed limitation to try to get 3 units on a majority of lots that then could range upwards based on lot size. That's just the density metric alone. You factor in everything else, but yeah, that was a self-prescribed metric here to allow for a variety of housing types in our zone.
To meet the state's
To meet,
mandate.
yes, to also meet the minimum density of 15 units per acre, yes.
And that 22 units was set specifically to be as close as possible to the state's requirement, right? So we can't, like, if we can't lower to 21, it dips below the 15 that the state requires. That number was self-prescribed, but it is specifically to meet
for compliance.
The state's compliance.
Right, because there's a difference between the density on a parcel, which doesn't include the streets, and then the density on an area, which includes all the streets. So once you put all that street in there, right, you sort of you change the denominator, right? And so that the 15 units has to be, you have to bump up the parcel number to get to the 15 unit. So.
All right. That's all I had. Thank you.
Good questions. Thank you.
Put on the Zoom.
So we want to close the public hearing?
John, I could think of one more before you close. I don't think it's necessarily important. Where do you think we stand on this design book that has been surfaced and
So, right, we had gotten a grant of a housing grant, and we were gonna factor a lot of the funds of that grant into the pattern book.
okay.
We're now revising our scope of work here. There's less funds going to that pattern book in the grant. We're keeping it in the scope as a potential use of grant funds, but it's definitely more self-limiting. But I think our other intent then is to come to April town meeting with a funding request to not just to supplement both the grant to say we should probably do a pattern book with whatever form is chosen. Like I like the design guidelines, we all might, but South Main could definitely use an update. They could use more visuals. I think they're very text heavy and people outside of our world can always see it. So how we can get visuals into them, whatever form and zoning concept we choose, we would like the pattern book to remain on the table. And then those funds can also be used to help us do further modeling and analysis with the consultant and do townwide mailings that we heard was a priority. At least twice, hopefully, through this process. One at the general public engagement, if we go that route, and then for the public hearings again. And those are a decent chunk of change. So we have supplemental funding else to add to back to that.
Andrew, would it be prudent now to see if there's some neighboring towns that maybe have a pattern book?
I can ask Innis Design. They are working through examples and areas that they found. I don't think it's quite as commonplace here in Massachusetts, especially for the form we were originally looking at. So it's likely to kind of be a combination of, you know, existing things we can pull, but also a lot of new references, images, ratios, things like that. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah, because unlike other states, Massachusetts typically has not been allowed to reference in design guidelines until more recently. So typically haven't incorporated it where other states.
Yeah, I think our intention, Tom, would still definitely be to do one. We just have to find out what we're doing it on first. So,
yeah.
Well, my only thought is, I've got no problem if we gather material to begin with, because two things might happen. One, we might see some pictures that we'd be willing to accept. And two, we might find out who out there in the Commonwealth is doing this type of stuff. So we might end up getting a list of drafters that could assist. But I just like to have some idea of what we may be thinking of. And I don't want to come up with the last month and say, okay, we're going to approve this or not. And if a writer's got to write something, the full text of it, that's going to take drafting time and the like. I'd rather pirate and hire the author that wrote the book we want to pirate. So
I agree. I can't promise that it'll be done at whatever town meeting time, but it will be pretty close, hopefully, and we can at least have an idea of what's in it and how it's to be used. Yeah. But then it can be formalized, hopefully shortly after that.
Okay.
Sure.
So, at the last meeting, this is a non-technical question. At the last meeting,
Like those.
there was a lot of feedback or questions, and one was, you know, questioning kind of what are the guiding principles? What are the things that we're trying to accomplish? And I kind of came away with that thinking, I mean, what are we going to accomplish? It's going to be whatever plan affects the least amount of residents, you know, just based on once you take multiple options to town meeting, you're gonna have, you know, who is least effective, which of course might be us over there on South Main Street. But there was question of like an advisory or a work group. Is that something that you guys have thought about? I know that it's, you know, also work, but almost like trying to find champions in certain neighborhoods to kind of get the message out there. Because what you see is people are gonna show, oh, I'm not in the map this time, so I'm not coming to the meeting. Oh, now I am in the map and suddenly I'm interested, and it's just creating this like volleyball effect. Anyway, it seems like if there was an opportunity to kind of vet some of these ideas, strengths, weaknesses before they get to town meeting, it might be. I don't envy any of your jobs.
Yeah, I mean, from the staff side, it's definitely not what's the least impactful to residents. It's about addressing need and what's best for the town, hopefully, is the consensus that we can get. In terms of the working group, we weren't planning to configure one, just given the time constraints. It would take time to do that, and even areas that have done it, hit roadblocks as well. I think we've gotten a lot of strong public comment that we can take and factor into our proposals, and because it will still be vetted through the public process, we'll have it here on these agendas. We're always available. We're going to try to keep updating and keep, you know, those that are involved to date, try to keep them involved. That way, hopefully it's just confidence building along the way and everybody kind of comes naturally with us. So that's the hope and intent, at least from our side. Happy to take who's.
Yeah, right. A couple of things you brought up. One is, right, the what's the point? Like what, you know, and I, right, we heard in our meetings and from other people just around, right? Like everyone has a different point. And I don't think that with the time allotted, right, I don't think that we're going to come up with a consensus point of why we're doing this. I mean, one point that we're not even coalesced around the point of complying with MBTA communities, because you hear that, right, there's a whole bunch of people that say, no, we shouldn't even comply. Like, not at all. We should vote it down, right? Whatever you come up with, we want to vote it down. So there really, this more than anything else I've seen, right, there really is not a very good consensus. There's certainly a group that says just do the minimum. Right, I'm looking at a letter right here that says, I pulled it up because I want to remember exactly what it said. You know, don't impact existing single family home zones. Well, that you look at that map or wherever the zoning map is, that leaves like almost none of Reading, right? So I did not walk into this process thinking that was a goal. But certainly there's plenty of people who do, right? So I don't think that we're going to get to that point. And we've had a lot of meetings. I'll just second Andrew's point that I know the idea about some subgroup was talked about. That does take a lot of resources, because right, it's all has to be open meeting stuff, and so yeah, that ends up being a lot just to do that.
A lot of the towns that deployed them as like the first phase of their process. And they organize them by selecting like a representative from like, you would take like someone from this board, someone from historical, someone from the housing authority, pretty much all the ones we've seen, they had a structure like that. Their plans had no greater chance of success when they became public. I will say that. Many of them, even though they came from a working group with 20 people that worked on it, for one of them we saw literally worked on their plan for 18 months. And that plan was destroyed in public meetings. And so I think it's a huge amount of effort to administrate that. And I think if we were going to do it, we would have started with that.
I think I think what Andrew and Mary said, right, like just making sure, like, right, getting people are aware now, right? And keeping, when we start back up public meetings, making sure that all gets out there. Right, people will drop in and out because that's the nature of zoning. It's boring, but trying to keep that going as much as we can, I think, is the best we can do. Really.
Well, thanks for all your work. I mean, at least we can all appreciate that you're all trying to do what's best for the town. So thank you for that.
Andrew, you had a couple meetings with individual voting precincts, didn't you?
We did, yeah.
I didn't go to any of those. How was it received in those meetings?
Yeah, I think people generally left them more understanding of what the concept was, and why it was being proposed. Not that they necessarily fully agreed with it or the scale of it, but I think there was just a stronger understanding of why and how we got there, which I thought they were immensely helpful, actually, personally. Sometimes when you're in those smaller group discussions, you can just talk more directly and kind of get a little bit more clarity and understanding back and forth. So it's something we'd like to consider again in the future as we find these concepts that start to take ahead. But in the meantime, I don't know that we'll be doing them in the very short term, because we want to use them for concepts for a town meeting that to build confidence in town meeting members that we're bringing something that they understand and are aware of.
So I thought that at those meetings, there was a greater diversity of opinion on where this process should go, which I think is interesting in and of itself, right? Because we all know it, right? When you're in this room, right, and it's packed to the gills, right? Like you got to have a pretty strong opinion, a very strong opinion to step up in front of everyone and say your piece. So, you know, a lot of people don't.
Yeah, the strengths of them were residents and town meeting members could talk to each other and kind of see those different perspectives and hopefully gain an understanding together. Yeah.
We were very productive.
I think, you know, the benefit is you've got the town meeting reps that know what their neighborhood.
Right.
Yes.
As opposed to a lot of issues, town meeting reps know what they want. And, you know, we went through this many years ago where town meeting members were totally unprepared for town meeting. And so the town made a big effort of, we have to educate the town meeting members on what they're voting on and voting on it. And get packets out early and get a lot more information out. I think town meeting was much more successful after that.
Agreed. Yep, that's
We've done that on certain things. And this is probably one
we'll do again.
Yeah.
It is also one of the kind of unintended benefits of not taking it to April, which is that there's not a town meeting election directly ahead of it.
So you're not gonna have all turnover.
Right. So, yeah, our recommendation would be to close the public hearing. Of course, no recommendation to town meeting needed. Then we'll just march onward from here.
We'll take the comments that you suggested, and make some revisions to the memo, and then we're going to publish it on the project webpage.
Something on the memo, there's like a really big affordable housing paragraph. If you could break it at least in half.
You got it.
I could not finish it.
I couldn't either.
You could just like send us like comments and be like, too long. That's a good comment.
Just break it in half and.
Got it. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Drive safe, yes.
Do not feel bad if your comment is, this is too long.
So I guess nothing is going for a vote.
Yeah.
Whether they're putting it on a vote, right?
Oh,
They're having a
that's
referendum.
tomorrow?
Yeah, it's supposed to be tomorrow. They're having a
Oh,
referendum.
what a bad day to have it on.
Yeah.
If they still have it.
You're right, so yeah, so that's a tough one. Sure.
The door opens.
Yeah.
I'm here. Thank you.
If anyone else wants to reread the memo and give us more comments, feel free to do that this week. We're probably not going to publish it this week. So if you have additional thoughts after this, as you marinate on it, just let us know.
So we're going to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing for zoning bylaw amendments for April 2024 town meeting in relation to MGL section 3A, also known as MBTA Communities Law.
I'll second.
All right, roll call vote. Tony?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
John, yes. Hillary?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
We need another vote on, we're not accepting the memo, so it doesn't matter, correct?
Right, no.
Okay.
Something else on the agenda?
Other business, I had minutes. Tony sent me comments on the minutes. Anyone else have comments on
Didn't get to them.
minutes?
No comments. Are we,
ready for a vote or?
Sure.
To review?
I didn't review them, so I don't know.
I thought they were fine.
Motion to approve the minutes from the meeting on 12/11/23.
Second.
All right, roll call. Tony,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
John, yes. Hillary,
Can I abstain?
you can.
Okay.
Tom,
Yes.
And the motion passes. Motion to approve the minutes from 1/8/2024.
I'll second.
all right, roll call vote. Tony,
Yes.
Yes.
Mark, John, yes. Hillary,
Abstain.
Tom,
Yes.
all right.
Thank you. We can provide a brief update. We haven't done this in a while on some other things we've been working on.
You're working on other.
Yeah, you know, this isn't your only.
It's shocking as that.
I'll pass it to Mary for the NSAP. She's
Yeah.
was at the
That's-
check-in.
Can I just sort of
Yep.
back up a little bit?
Sure.
I was, again, we were talking about all the other things you're working on. So eventually the town has to do an updated master plan, and I've seen some references to the master plan, which is what, 2007?
Six, yeah.
And then we've got what's the net zero, and you've got, what was the other one?
MVP 2.0.
We're doing that.
I don't know if you're.
We have the Robert
Streets.
Drive,
Um,
Arts and Culture Plan.
EDAP.
Yeah, is there some way that can all get sort of somehow coordinated? I mean, not just you guys coordinating them, but it just seems like we've got all these different octopus legs out there that are all kind of connecting to the center of the town. And you know, is there a way that can be either group some of them together or look at the outline of the study and how does this study affect that study and make sure that that's all coordinated?
Yeah, I mean, on the internal side, we're definitely always doing that and making sure one plan relates to another, is aware of the other's goals and recommendations, data, all these things. I do agree from the public side, it does, like, I think one leader used to like whack-a-mole-ish. So how we kind of form them together in that sense probably is closer to some sort of visioning goal or process and master process. I know we were asked to explore that last town meeting and like funds and what a scope could be. Admittedly, we've just been so busy with so many other plans. It kind of fell off once those numbers of 200,000-300,000 for a full master plan were kind of thrown out, and we just haven't pushed it too much further. So we're happy to reinvestigate that.
I just didn't want to make sure that all these things were, you know, you didn't have the net zero people and the MVP people.
Right.
And someone else is saying, oh, you know, we have to do this for the master plan. And I think, you know, one of the challenges we had with the air master plan was that a lot of it is statutory, what sections.
Yes,
covered.
it is.
A lot of them are kind of.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
Whereas you don't really talk about sustainability.
Right.
You know, a lot of those, because, you know, one of the things that I was really pushing on for transportation is, let's not think about transportation as you're driving your car down Main Street. You know, we've got to start thinking about autonomous vehicles and other modes of transportation and incorporate for instance, complete streets into the transportation. And the planner had a really hard time getting that. He's like, no, we gotta do this. So I just wanted to make sure that that was something that would make your jobs easier to.
Yeah, I mean, it makes our jobs easier in the public vetting process of why we're doing these things or why we're pushing these certain recommendations, right? That sometimes get lost, right? Just from the length of time since some things have happened. But again, inside, we try to stay pretty strong and consistent on where we're going with the plans and their needs and why we're doing them. But I hear you for sure. I just don't know what to.
Grant based.
Right.
So like they seem kind of random because we have grants for all of them, right? And so I think it's like we have the MBTA communities and then we have a whole bunch of other plans that are running on grants.
Yeah.
I don't quite know how to fully solve that without thinking through it a bit more.
So I guess, two thoughts on that. One is, our charge, I think CPDC's charge maybe was before I don't know which town meeting it was at, but we were supposed to come up with a budget. And I guess the question and report back to town meeting, right? Or report, I forget exactly what
there was something about that.
You reported to the select board?
At some point.
I guess maybe we should dig that out,
Yeah.
right? Was it an instructional motion, I think, ended up being, and figure out or recall what that is so that there's, if it gets brought up.
Yeah.
We addressed it. But I do recall after that meeting that we did have a discussion, or it might have been actually before that meeting, because we knew it was coming up, is about, without doing a full, there's a couple thoughts. One is the discussion of doing a full town master plan had been brought up because ours is so old, but because there was so much change going on with zoning and development that it didn't quite feel the right time to then, because everything would have been reactionary.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, it's best not to do a reactionary master plan. And so that got put off. But I thought there was a discussion of let's look at all the plans that we have and look at the gaps that we know that we have. And maybe instead of doing a full master plan, maybe we know we need to address the transportation component because there hasn't been a grant for that. Right. And then
when your other infrastructure might have already been addressed.
Right. And then when it comes time to pull all the master plan together, right, you have to address the nitty gritty stuff, but a lot of the thinking had been done, whether through, this other housing production plan.
Housing production plan is a big master plan.
But I recall having that conversation.
I do too.
At some point.
Yes,
I don't remember when it was.
I would have to go back as well, but I agree. We can start reinvestigating that and at least putting something together of like a matrix of here's some recent plans we've done. Here's maybe some gaps we've seen, and where we can go from there, whether that's fully or continuing to one at a time in the short term. So.
Right, because putting that list together, it may be like, oh yeah,
right.
we really need that one. We really need that one,
Yeah.
Or these guys are doing this, how come we're doing the same thing?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Is there an open space and rec plan?
There is. Completed in 2022, I think. Yeah.
I seem to recall that, but I get mixed up because I was involved in all those other ones.
It's a nice plan.
It was a long process. For whatever reason, it ended up being longer than we expected it to be. Okay, good feedback, good notes. We'll try to reconvene on that.
All right, net zero.
Sure. Quick, let's get out of here. We kicked off a net zero action plan. We have a municipal advisory group and a community advisory group for the plan, which is kind of great. We focus with the community advisory group on getting people who really have not been involved with the town before, which is exciting for us and for them. We are working with MAPC. There are consultants on the plan. They completed the preliminary greenhouse gas emissions inventory using 2017 data, which will be updated when they update their tool later this year to more recent data, which will be our final. And so we presented that along with some slides from RMLD at a public kickoff. It was pretty well attended. I think maybe about 30 people in the room and 10 or 15 online, which we thought was a nice showing for what's essentially just like an informational meeting on emissions. Obviously the most, like if you look through the slides, the one that jumps out at everyone is the fact that we are #1 in per capita emissions based on the preliminary data, right? Because it's like, oh, it doesn't look, Reading looks pretty par for the course, but when you do it per capita, we're actually worst out of anyone who's used that MAPC tool. So that's interesting information to have. And then we're moving forward with doing some focus groups, continuing to work with a community advisory group, the kind of next stage. We have this information, right? And then we start to move forward into potential strategies that will go into the actual plan. So.
The interesting element is that we're always usually focused on what the municipality controls. How can we improve our schools, our buildings, our things? We're like 1%.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yes. Yeah.
And so it's kind of how do we actually be on those other sides start getting there?
I think one of the issues is that, we've got a municipal light department. So they're out of all the, like the mass energy insight stuff. So there's not a lot of incentives.
They have their own.
They do have their own incentives and they've come a long way, but it's just different than, you go to, Home Depot and there's like solar panels and one in Reading, okay.
Right.
And I know Green Communities is more from the municipal side, but we did, under Green Communities, we got grants and saved a ton of electricity. I think some pretty cost-effective things.
Yeah, and communities will come back up in the late spring. Hopefully the legislation will be done. It sounds like they will be, and we can reapply and get designated, hopefully once and for all. It's a bit of a process, but we'll try to squeeze that in.
One of the things that you have to do under Green Communities, I forget the name of the application, but there's an online application where you put in on all your municipal buildings, all your energy use.
MEI,
MEI,
mass energy.
And I don't know whether we do that.
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's really good to get the baseline.
It is, and that's helping inform the net zero too. And so the net zero is just interesting, right? We have the UNESCO plan with facilities for our school facilities, but they're not necessarily focused on renewable or clean energy. It's more just energy efficiency and improvements and upgrades. So there's a lot of ways it can bridge existing programs and new, but it definitely over the wider community, how we, right, on the residential building sides, how we start those upgrades at a reasonable costs and things like that. Like that's the challenge to actually figure out here. So it'll be interesting. But it's informative for sure.
Yeah, I think it was helpful for people to even have RMLD at the kickoff meeting we had, because they presented on a bunch of their programs. As we said, this whole process is an educational opportunity. People don't know what already exists, So we thought, as we work through the plan, it's important just to let everyone know that we don't need to start everything from scratch. There are already existing things.
And I saw my neighbor last summer unloading a electric lawnmower, and I go, "You can get a rebate for that again."
Yep, electric lawn equipment. Yep. So.
And I assume they have heat pump rebates.
Yes.
And all sorts of things that. Yes. A lot of it's just a matter of education and encouragement.
And we're starting to focus with them a bit more on the commercial side and where we can help on commercial buildings and incentives. So maybe some hopefully future longer term projects. I think they're involved in right now municipal solar on certainly the new school, but maybe some existing schools too, and how we can really start to get up to speed on those fronts. So
Are a lot of towns putting net zero zoning in place?
There's been a handful.
Which didn't.
There is a round of 10 communities, I think now it's 8, who have successfully gotten the state to agree to allow them to do electric only development, new development, electric only, where typically nowadays, if there's a gas connection, existing connection, you can use it under building code, stretch code or new stretch code, I think. So there are a few that are pursuing it. I don't know how strongly they've been utilized yet. And if Reading wanted to get into maybe one of those last 2 spots, you gotta be MBTA communities compliant, you gotta do all these other things. So it's quite a rigorous, that's why actually Arlington and Lexington kind of pushed ahead with their zoning compliance to maintain their spot in there. So, you know, it's a unique one. I think it has its own challenges for sure, but certainly there's been smart growth or lead development standards for certain density types and uses in municipalities, but.
So going back to this emissions per capita, right, where Reading was there any thought or insight into why Reading was? I mean, I look at this and I guess my quick look is that, you know, if a big share of emissions is actually from residential homes, right, instead of commercial homes. And I look at the list of communities that were in here and they all have considerable multifamily housing stock. Until you get to the right-hand side of Weston, Concord and Reading, which are primarily single family. Is that that's my quick read. Is that what someone who knows more about this?
That was my quick read to it. I don't think we've delved too much deeper into it yet, but that was my quick read of it. Yes, and whether that's age of stock or use or all of that combined, it's definitely an interesting takeaway for sure.
It is coupled with the conversation that we just
No,
had,
it's
right? You know,
one in the same conversation.
yes, yeah.
And I think even like in the public meeting, they were asking, they were like, well, you must have included like emissions from the highway in our car emissions. There's no way our emissions could be that high for private cars. And it was like, oh, no, that's just the estimated for just private vehicles in Reading.
Registered vehicles in Reading.
That's a true number. And people were very surprised by that information, right? And I think it's all part of that conversation, right? They say, oh, we need 2 parking spaces for every single unit. And it's the same conversation. It's 2 sides of the same conversation.
Yeah.
So good pickup there.
Yeah, we're curious to see when they run it again with more recent data. How it changes.
We have done a lot of heat pumps. Maybe not a lot, but like 75 to 100 heat pumps. Does that help at all? Probably not in the grand scheme of things, but it'll be interesting for sure.
Right, and I guess I would also assume that the fuel oil based homes, right, end up having higher emissions. So they're depending on the age of the reinvestment in the housing stock, I should say, right? Not necessarily the age of it.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
Arlington, there was a lot of condo conversions in Arlington, right? And they, you know, everyone upgraded their systems when they did that. Not the same number of condo conversions in Reading. Sure, the single family homes.
No, not single family home.
So that was that one, just to keep you in the loop. The other one on the agenda that we had was the Walker's Brook Drive redesign.
Question.
Yeah.
I have to recuse myself.
No, it's not a public hearing or anything. Tony was there. Thank you for attending. So I think we had briefly mentioned it over other business in the past of there's a survey out, hey, we're doing this. Last week, I think it was last week, that we held the first public meeting after we accepted all the survey results, ran through it. Very good, strong public process. Kind of, again, we had a very strong showing for what is a transportation-based planning effort. We had 100 people there combined between the room and Zoom. So that was pretty good. We shared the 3 alternatives of the Walker's Brook Drive corridor that have been conceptualized to this point, all of which included bike capacity, pedestrian improvements, and restriping for safer turning movements. Some probably stronger in their infrastructure side than others, like alternative 1 was just a 4-foot shallow on a road unprotected. Alternatives 2 and 3 were separated bike or pedestrian walkways. So those concepts really kind of got pushed out there now, and it was actually there were certainly a few that had their concerns or their reasonings of why are we doing this? Where would this bike lane go? Kind of happens on every bike lane conversation until you actually start doing one, is where does it go? And the answer is, well, you got to keep building them until you can really fully connect. And all of it is in the vein of safety too, right? Speeds and turning movements. So it's definitely a large scale design change that the town, whether we put it on the tip or not in the future as we kind of continue this process, will be TBD. But the hope and intent is that we'll kind of start to finalize the strongest concept again, an alternative to start pushing forward, hopefully to another design that if we can get grant funds or local to start getting it even pushed that much further. Each one again has their own, pros and cons, easements and costs and things to that nature. There are some ideas of a potential rotary at the end of General Way and Walker's Brook Drive. So all in all, it was very well I shouldn't say very, there was a strong support for it from a number of people. We had bikers there, we had strong pedestrian users there that encouraged a lot of this, which was great. So we're hopeful that this continues forward. The grant ends in June, and then it'll be up to staff and our town leaders to kind of keep it rolling and pick it back up. But the hopeful intent is that that's what we do. So very strong showing. Stay in the loop if you're interested. Check out the project website. I know, yeah.
I mean, first off, my understanding is the grant was a housing choice grant.
It is, yeah.
But the project's being led by your economic development director, correct?
It is, yeah. At this time,
That's kind of one of the issues I've got, is that you're bringing in more for a housing choice grant. You went basically straight to the businesses and said, what do you guys want? Met with them privately, and then you start with the community involvement.
So we haven't met with any businesses yet down that corridor. I think we made them aware of the process for sure. I could be mistaken. I don't know if he sat individually. I should step back. We did have a business stakeholder meeting to explain the process actually and what we were doing. I don't think it was necessarily the direct feedback that engagement was last week, but we took that opportunity of, right, this is the strongest corridor in town of need of a redesign, a full redesign and safety improvements. And on the flip side, could it help show that the town is invested in also saying, hey, Walker's Brook Drive could be a corridor destination. We're willing to help improve and promote pedestrian infrastructure and alternative infrastructure to not just Lake Q, but even hopefully in the near future, our downtown or through General Way. So there was a lot of reasonings for it to start there, but the housing choice grant is really kind of a broad bucket of what you can do with it, infrastructure, planning, design, housing related or not. It's really in the vein of development. So it is a wonky grant title for it, but it kind of made sense for us to start there. But
how much research did they actually do before these proposals went through? The reason I ask is that all 3 of them have a left turn out of General Way. That's actually part of the current road into general way. But
Mhm.
there's the right turn only, and then there's the turn for everything. Except that's only 12 feet. You can't get two cars across there, but they had two lanes every single time.
Trying to think back to these specifics.
It just seems that somebody went in and said, okay, well, what can we do here? And didn't bother checking anything for the permissions for what's available.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was all within what is town controlled right of way, and we can make improvements and or work with property owners to the degree necessary. But I think even that left-hand approach was the idea that we'll upgrade the light there and rework the drive apron to allow for left and right hand.
Except there's also the site plan review prohibits a left turn.
Yeah.
So there's a lot, every single property there has a site plan review with limitations to it that was agreed to by the town, the business, and basically the abutters.
Yeah, it's more of, you know, if that improvement is safety and of desire as well, can we work as the community to improve it? And I think everybody would love a left-hand turn out of Market Basket. That condition, right, is a site plan specific condition, maybe even special permit, if don't quite remember how one general way was permitted. But we can work within some of those constraints for sure, I think. And I hope
In the constraints or just ignore the constraints?
not ignore constraints. You know, we're willing to work with property owners and the residents and community all alike. And so.
You may notice that this is perhaps a bit too personal.
No worries at all. So they're good questions. So our economic development director is transitioning out of his role into another. So we'll be taking over the project in the short term, so I can jump into more of those specifics to get more specific answers for you. I've been kind of on the periphery and helping it move along, but now I can get into the details like that. So.
All right.
Which consultant are you using?
It's Kimley Horn.
Do you like the bike lane study?
The bike lanes are an okay idea on the assumption that at some point in the relative near future, and when I say near, I'm talking less than 50 years, that the state will rebuild the bridge so that you can actually bike from where you want to be to Quanapao, which is basically what the goal is.
Yeah.
But you've got a huge problem with Washington Street that you're basically dumping at both ends, you're dumping your bicyclists off into no man's land.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we recognize that both prior to and during the public process of, again, kind of where does it go, right? That's always the question. And so, again, can we work within the confines of General Way and maybe New Crossing Road and shepherd people through there? Can we find out alternatives on Village, John? Washington's pretty tight, but there is potential there to, you know, expand the connections and keep it rolling. It's just, it comes down to the idea that maybe not every bike lane needs to be separated and protected. If it's in a residential quiet neighborhood, maybe you can try to push everybody through that way. And so lot at thought. It's kind of our reasoning of, hey, we should probably do a bike and ped master plan and transit oriented plans. So.
Streets.
Right.
And I don't know what the status of that is, because, you know,
yeah,
you do a plan and then you implement some of it and you go, well, things have changed. I want to change my priority. And the state goes, no, we paid for you to do this plan. You're not changing the priority. And you go, well, we learned stuff.
Yeah.
If they've, I know that the staff has changed at MassDOT, so.
Yeah, no, I'd like to, I think we just recently got a complete street grant, and that program has its own limitations, right? You can only go every 3 years or something like that, and such stringent timelines and requirements for it, and even their match components and funding for it is never always the strongest it could probably be, but reprioritizing that or refreshing that should at least get a look at for sure, I think. So.
Yeah, I feel like out of all the meetings we've done in the last 6 months, which is a truly insane amount, the number one thing we heard out of them was people want a bike ped plan. Because they're like, this area isn't walkable. You're telling us the distance is walkable, but it's not walkable. what is the town's plan for investing in infrastructure for the future
Mhm.
to improve other forms of mobility? That's something we have heard consistently across all the meetings that we've had, so.
Want to reduce those vehicle emissions per capita.
Just have to get them off the main roads. Instead of Washington Street, use Green Street. That would make more sense. It's less traveled and you could actually have a bike there that doesn't impact much.
Right, and that's what we mean, yeah, like.
Yeah, once you bike around, you kind of know where you take the shortcuts to the intersections and things like that, but it is scary from, because I ride a lot.
Mhm.
And when you're coming up on Walker's Brook, once you hit Washington Street at Main Street, it's a scary intersection. And coming up on Salem Street to the center, like, didn't get hit this time.
Yep. Yep, Haverhill is tough, the Sharrows, even the West Street bike lane is odd, it just dumps into the metal.
Haverhill's not bad, except DPW needs to sweep it every week.
Okay. Otherwise.
All right.
Project, good questions. Anyone, you guys? I think that's.
Else going on?
There's a lot more going on, but those are the two that came up recently, so.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Tom.
All right,
Thanks,
Tom.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye now.
Yeah, when you start doing that bike pad or complete streets, let me know.
Yeah, for sure.
It was funny because